The shot echoed across the snow-covered hills, startling a pair of ravens into flight. James Walker lowered his rifle, the barrel still smoking in the frigid air, and approached the fallen heifer. She'd broken her leg in the night, sliding down an icy embankment, and there was nothing to be done. No veterinarian for 30 miles, no money to pay one if there were. James knelt beside the animal, placing a weathered hand on her cooling flank. "Sorry, old girl," he murmured, his breath clouding before him. "I failed you too." She was the last of his herd, the final casualty of 3 years of drought economic collapse, and a fate that seemed determined to strip him of everything he'd built. James remained there for several minutes, snow soaking through his worn denim at the knees, letting the silence of the Montana winter press around him. Finally, he stood, joints protesting with a familiar ache that belonged to a man twice his 38 years. The walk back to his cabin was slow, deliberate, each footstep breaking through the frozen crust of yesterday's snowfall. The structure came into view, small, timber-framed smoke, curling from the stone chimney. Once it had been the caretaker's quarters, a humble outbuilding overshadowed by the main farmhouse where he and Sarah had planned to raise their family. Now the farmhouse was gone, claimed by a wildfire last spring. The cabin was all that remained. Inside, James stirred the fire, adding the last of the split logs. The single room was spare but orderly, a testament to military habits that hadn't faded in the 17 years since the Great War. His gaze settled on the photograph propped against a tin cup on the shelf above the hearth. Sarah smiled back at him, her eyes bright with the future they'd imagined together, her dark hair falling in waves around a face that had known laughter more than sorrow. That was before. Before the market crash of '29 that wiped out their savings, before the drought of '31 that withered their crops and starved their cattle. Before the fever took her last winter, when the trip to the doctor in Oak Ridge might have saved her if only they'd had the money for medicine. James opened the drawer beneath the shelf and removed the revolver. It was heavy, purposeful, a Colt .45 he'd carried through the trenches of France. He turned it over in his hands, considering. 197 days since he'd buried Sarah on the hill behind the cabin. 197 days of silence, of empty rooms and memories that offered no comfort. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts, so faint he might have imagined it. James stilled, listening. The knock came again, hesitant but unmistakable. No one had come to his door since the funeral. The bank representatives sent letters about his mounting debt. They didn't bother with the drive up the mountain. James returned the revolver to the drawer and crossed to the door. When he pulled it open, the dying light of evening caught her small bare foot, despite the snow, dressed in clothes the color of dust and ash. She clutched a ragged doll as if it were all the world had left her. Wide, solemn eyes lifted to his. "Could you buy my doll?" she whispered, voice tremoring like a candle flame in draft. "My brother hasn't eaten in 3 days." Only then did James notice the second child, a boy no more than 3, half hidden behind his sister's skirt. The child's sunken cheeks and glazed eyes spoke of malnutrition, bordering on starvation. "What's your name?" James asked, his voice rough from disuse. "Mary," the girl answered, straightening her thin shoulders. "This is Samuel. Our mama said to find a good man. She said a good man won't turn away a child." James felt something stir within him, an emotion he couldn't immediately identify. "Where is your mother?" Mary's fingers tightened around the doll's limp body, stuffing leaking through a seam at the shoulder. "She died 2 weeks ago. The coughing took her." James studied the girl, noticing now the exhaustion shadowing her young face, the way she kept her body between him and her brother, protective, wary. These were children who had learned not to trust adults who expected doors to close in their faces. "And your father?" Mary's expression closed like a shutter. "Gone, long before Samuel could walk." James glanced back at his cabin, the half-loaf of bread on the shelf, the meager sack of flour, the watery soup that would stretch his provisions another few days. Hunger was a math problem with sharp edges, an equation of survival. 2 more mouths would mean the difference between making it to spring or not. And yet, he stepped aside, gesturing them in. "I don't need to buy your doll, but I've got soup warming." Mary hesitated, seemingly unable to process this unexpected turn. "You'll help us come in before the cold takes what strength you have left," James replied, the gruffness in his tone masking emotions he wasn't ready to examine. The children entered with the cautious steps of those accustomed to having permission revoked. Samuel swayed slightly, his small body reaching the limits of endurance. James closed the door behind them, shutting out the orange rim of sunset. Inside, shadows stretched long across the plank floor. He guided them to the hearth, noticing how the boy's threadbare shirt hung from bony shoulders, how the girl's cracked lips spoke of dehydration. James ladled soup into tin bowls, adding extra potato to the children's portions. He broke the half-loaf into 3 pieces, hesitated, then gave the largest to the boy. Samuel ate with desperate intensity, small teeth tearing at the bread. Mary watched her brother for a moment before turning to James. "Thank you, sir," she whispered, those solemn eyes assessing him as if searching for the catch, the moment when kindness would reveal itself as something else. James nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude. "Eat," he said simply. "You need it more than I do." As they ate, he observed Mary breaking her bread in 2, passing the larger piece to Samuel, despite her own hollow-cheeked hunger. The gesture struck something inside him, a memory of scripture the preacher used to quote words that had seemed empty in the face of his own losses. "Whoever saves one life saves the world entire." James had not set foot in church since Sarah's funeral, but tonight those words seemed to perch in the rafters above him, impossible to ignore. When the children's chewing slowed, James spoke again. "How far have you walked?" Mary glanced at the window where darkness now pressed complete. "Since morning. We came from the Riley place down in the valley. I'm new at a tenant farm about 8 miles distant. That's a long way for little legs in this cold." She nodded, shoulders slumping, as the momentary revival from food gave way to bone-deep exhaustion. Samuel was already nodding off his head, drooping against his sister's arm. "We knocked on 12 doors before yours," she said quietly. "People said they had nothing to spare. One lady cried when she sent us away." James felt a flicker of shame for his community, quickly followed by understanding. These were desperate times. Few had anything to give. That he could offer even this meager meal was only because he had no one to share with, no one depending on him. Until now. He set a folded quilt on the floor near the hearth. "You can sleep here tonight. It's warm by the fire." Mary lowered Samuel gently onto the makeshift bed, tucking the frayed doll between them. She looked up at James, a question in her eyes that she seemed afraid to ask. "I don't send children away when night is cold," he said, answering what remained unspoken. The tension in her small shoulders eased slightly. She lay down beside her brother, one thin arm protectively circling his form. Sleep claimed them quickly, the heavy rest of those who had pushed beyond endurance. James stood watching the fire crackling like memory itself. The room seemed different, with their presence not less lonely, but strangely alive. He walked to the window where only darkness greeted him now. Out in the distance, coyotes cried sharp against the hush. Lord, he whispered more to the night than to himself, don't let me fail them, too. Morning came with pale winter sunlight, and the realization that the flour sack was emptier than he'd remembered. James had risen before dawn, checking on the children still deeply asleep, before stepping out to split the last of the firewood. The exertion warmed his blood, but did nothing to quiet the questions circling his mind. What was he to do with these children? He could feed them today, perhaps tomorrow. But then, what the bank was threatening foreclosure? He had no means to care for himself, let alone two young ones. The sensible course would be to take them to town to the church or the sheriff, someone who could find them proper care. And yet the thought of delivering them to authorities filled him with a nameless dread. Orphanages were overflowing in these hard times. Brothers and sisters were often separated. The girl's words echoed, 12 doors before yours. When he returned to the cabin, Mary was awake, sitting cross-legged by the hearth. She'd combed her hair with her fingers and attempted to smooth the wrinkles from her dress. The doll sat propped in her lap, its single-button eye regarding James with blank curiosity. "Morning," he said, setting down the armload of split wood. "Good morning, sir," she replied, the formality strange from such a young mouth. "Samuel is still sleeping. He gets tired easy since Mama died." James nodded, moving to the stove where he set a pot of water to boil. "How old are you, Mary?" "7, sir. Samuel just turned 3 in October." She hesitated, then added, "I can work. Mama taught me to sweep and wash dishes. I'm strong for my size." The statement, delivered with such earnest determination, twisted something in James's chest. A child offering labor in exchange for survival. "I'm sure you are," he said, keeping his voice steady. "But children shouldn't have to be strong that way." Mary tilted her head, regarding him with puzzlement, as if he'd spoken in a foreign tongue. Before she could respond, Samuel stirred on the quilt, his small face creasing with momentary confusion before settling on his sister. He reached for her hand. "It's okay, Sammy," she soothed. "This is Mr." She looked to James, realizing she didn't know his name. "Walker," he supplied. "James Walker. Mr. Walker gave us food and a place to sleep," Mary continued. "Remember I told you we'd find somebody good?" Samuel nodded solemnly, eyes now fixed on James with the unnerving directness of the very young. The boy had yet to speak a word. "He doesn't talk much," Mary explained, catching James's questioning look. "Not since Mama got sick. But he understands everything." James set bowls of hot porridge before them, the last of his oats sweetened with a precious spoonful of honey he'd been saving. As the children ate, he took stock of their condition in the morning light. Both were dangerously thin, their clothes inadequate for winter. Samuel's lips still held a bluish tinge that spoke of poor circulation, and a troubling rattle accompanied his breathing. The boy needed a doctor. But the nearest one was in Oak Ridge, 5 miles down treacherous mountain roads, and James had no way to carry a child that distance except on foot. He had avoided town for months, unwilling to face the pity or judgment of those who had witnessed his slow decline from respected rancher to near pauper. And there was another concern, one that nagged at the edges of his conscience. If he brought these children to town, questions would be asked. Authorities would be notified, his solitude would be broken, and the thin thread by which he maintained ownership of his land might snap under scrutiny. The bank was looking for any excuse to foreclose, to claim the valuable acres that Harold Mills, the bank president, had coveted for years. James had rebuffed Mills' offers to buy the land, even as his situation grew more desperate. It was all he had left of the dream he'd shared with Sarah. But the boy's labored breathing decided the matter. Some risks had to be taken. "We need to get Samuel to a doctor," James said, as Mary finished her porridge. "Can you both walk a little farther today?" Mary's eyes widened with alarm. "Are you sending us away?" "No," James answered, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "I'm taking you to town to see Dr. Anderson. Samuel's breathing doesn't sound right." Relief flooded her face, followed quickly by worry. "But we don't have money for a doctor." "Let me worry about that," James said, already pulling on his coat. "Bundle up as best you can. It's a long walk down the mountain." The journey to Oak Ridge took over 3 hours, with frequent stops for the children to rest. James carried Samuel for the steepest portions of the descent, the boy's slight weight a painful reminder of how close to the edge these children had been living. Mary walked beside them, occasionally steadying herself against James's leg when the path grew icy. As they neared the outskirts of town, James felt a familiar tightness in his chest. Oak Ridge had been founded in the logging boom of the 1880s, a place of industry and promise that had weathered previous hard times with resilient optimism. But the Depression had hit it hard. The mill had closed 2 years ago, and half the storefronts on Main Street stood empty, windows papered over. It was just past noon when they reached Dr. Anderson's small practice on Elm Street. The doctor, a gray-haired man with wire-rimmed spectacles, raised his eyebrows at the sight of James. "Walker," he said, surprise evident in his tone. "Didn't expect to see you down from that mountain of yours." "The boy needs looking at," James replied, nodding toward Samuel in his arms. "Breathing's not right. Hasn't eaten properly in who knows how long." Dr. Anderson's professional demeanor took over as he ushered them into an examination room. "Set him on the table there. And who might these children be?" "Mary and Samuel," James answered, helping the girl onto a chair. "Their mother died recently. They showed up at my door last night." The doctor gave him a sharp look, but said nothing more as he began examining Samuel. His gentle hands moved efficiently, checking pulse temperature, listening to the boy's chest with his stethoscope. Mary watched with the vigilance of someone accustomed to being the sole protector. "Pneumonia's setting in," Dr. Anderson finally pronounced. "Early stages, thankfully. Severe malnutrition, dehydration." He turned to James, lowering his voice. "This boy's been neglected for some time, not just since his mother passed." James nodded, unsurprised. The story of absent fathers and struggling mothers was all too common in these harsh years. "I can give him medicine for the infection, but what he needs most is proper food, warmth, rest." The doctor paused, studying James's face. "The girl, too. They're both in a bad way." "I understand," James said. Dr. Anderson removed his spectacles, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Walker, I have to ask, what are your intentions here? You can't just take in 2 orphans. There are procedures authorities who handle these matters." "I'm handling it for now," James replied, an edge entering his voice. "Like you handled Sarah." The words were quiet, but struck like a physical blow. "I told you to bring her in sooner. If you'd listened—" "I know what you told me," James interrupted, the familiar guilt rising like bile. "This is different." The doctor sighed. "Children need more than a roof, and whatever scraps you can provide. They need stability, proper care. You're barely keeping yourself alive up there." Before James could respond, the door to the examination room opened. Sheriff Bennett stood in the doorframe, his broad shoulders filling the space. Behind him, partially obscured, was the unmistakable figure of Harold Mills Bank president, town council member, and the man who'd been trying to acquire James's land for the past 5 years. "Dr. Anderson." The sheriff nodded, then fixed his gaze on James. "Walker, heard you'd come to town. With children." James straightened instinctively, moving to stand between the newcomers and the children. Is there a law against seeking medical care? Sheriff Bennett's weathered face remained impassive. No law against that. But there are laws about the proper channels for orphaned minors. Mr. Mills here was just telling me about reports of 2 children gone missing from the Riley tenant farm after their mother's passing. Mills stepped forward, his expensive wool coat and polished shoes a stark contrast to the worn furnishings of the doctor's office. Despite being in his 60s, he stood straight-backed and imposing silver hair immaculately combed. "Walker," he said, a false warmth in his tone. "I'm concerned about these little ones. The proper authorities should be notified. I have connections with an excellent orphanage in Springfield, where they'd be well cared for." James felt Mary's hand slip into his, her small fingers gripping with surprising strength. He looked down to find her staring at Mills with undisguised fear. "They're receiving care right now," James said evenly. "Dr. Anderson was just explaining the treatment Samuel needs." "Which costs money," Mills pointed out. "Money you don't have if your outstanding banknotes are any indication." And the implication hung in the air, another debt to add to his mounting obligations, another reason the bank could justify taking his land. A new voice entered the conversation. "I believe emergency medical care for children is a moral obligation, not a financial transaction to be leveraged." All heads turned to the doorway where Reverend Timothy Hayes now stood. The minister was in his 60s, with a lean frame and penetrating gaze that belied his gentle reputation. Before taking the pulpit at Oak Ridge First Church, he'd been a lawyer in Chicago, a fact that made him one of the few people Mills treated with cautious respect. "Reverend," Mills acknowledged stiffly, "this is a matter of proper procedure." "Indeed," Timothy agreed. "And the proper procedure when a child is in medical distress is to provide care first and sort out the particulars later." He turned to James. "The church can assist with the medical expenses." Mills' mouth tightened. "These children should be placed with the county orphan services immediately." "The law allows for temporary emergency placement," Timothy countered, "especially when the child's health is at risk. Samuel clearly shouldn't be moved again today." He looked at the sheriff. "Wouldn't you agree, Bennett?" The sheriff shifted uncomfortably, caught between Mills's influence and the minister's moral authority. "I suppose 48 hours for medical stabilization wouldn't hurt. But after that, we'll need to follow proper channels." James felt Mary's grip tighten further. She tugged at his hand, and when he bent down, she whispered, "Please, don't let them take us away. Samuel gets scared with strangers." The quiet desperation in her voice solidified something in James's chest, a resolve he hadn't felt since Sarah's final days. "The children will stay with me until Samuel is well enough to travel," he stated, meeting Mills's cold gaze directly. "After that, we'll discuss permanent arrangements." Mills smiled thinly. "Always the stubborn one, aren't you, Walker? Very well. 48 hours. Then we'll revisit the matter." He turned to leave, adding over his shoulder, "Sheriff Bennett will check in tomorrow to ensure everything is proceeding appropriately." After Mills and the sheriff departed, Dr. Anderson administered medicine to Samuel and provided James with additional doses for the coming days. The boy had fallen into an exhausted sleep, his breathing slightly easier already. "He'll need to stay overnight for observation," the doctor said. "You and the girl can use the back room. There's a cot." James nodded unexpectedly, grateful. "Thank you." Left alone with Timothy, James found himself unable to meet the minister's eyes. They'd known each other for years. Timothy had officiated his wedding, to Sarah had spoken words of comfort at her funeral. But James had withdrawn from the church and its community in the months since. "You've taken on quite a responsibility." Timothy said quietly. It's temporary, James replied, though the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. Timothy studied him for a long moment. Sometimes the most important journeys begin with a single step we never intended to take. He glanced at Mary, who had curled up in a chair next to her sleeping brother. Those children found your door for a reason, James. They found my door because 12 others turned them away, James corrected. And yet, you didn't. Timothy placed a hand on his shoulder. That matters, perhaps more than you realize. As the minister left, James settled into the chair opposite Mary's. The girl had finally succumbed to exhaustion, her small form curled protectively toward Samuel even in sleep. The doll remained clutched in her arms, its single button eye reflecting the waning afternoon light. Through the window, James could see Mills and Sheriff Bennett in conversation across the street, their gestures animated. Occasionally, Mills would glance toward the doctor's office, his expression calculating. Dr. Anderson entered quietly, following James's gaze. Mills won't let this go easily, he said, keeping his voice low to avoid waking the children. He's been after your land for years. It's not about the children for him, James agreed. No, Anderson sighed. It's about that damn project he's been pushing, the one that needs exactly the elevation and water access your property provides. He hesitated. You know, this puts you in an impossible position, don't you? If you leave your homestead to care for these children, Mills will find a way to take it for back taxes or outstanding debt. If you abandon the children to protect your land, I'll be no better than whatever father left them, James finished. Night settled over Oak Ridge, bringing with it a stillness broken only by Samuel's occasional coughing. James remained awake, watching over the sleeping children, his mind churning with decisions that seemed to have no right answer. Mary stirred just after midnight, momentarily confused by her surroundings. It's all right, James assured her. You're at the doctor's. Samuel is doing better. She nodded, relief visible even in the dim light. Are you going to stay with us? She asked, the question layered with meanings beyond its simple words. James thought of his empty cabin of Sarah's grave on the hill of the land that was his last connection to the future they'd planned. He thought of Mills' determined pursuit of the bank's mounting pressure of a community that had turned away hungry children. And he thought of Mary's words at his door. A good man won't turn away a child. Yes, he said finally. I'm staying. The following morning dawned clear and bitter cold. Samuel's fever had broken during the night, his small body responding to the medicine with the resilience only children possess. Dr. Anderson examined him with cautious optimism. The pneumonia's responding, but he's still weak. Another day of rest would be ideal. James nodded, watching as Mary helped her brother sip water from a tin cup. She had not left Samuel's side, maintaining her vigil with the steadfastness of someone far beyond her 7 years. The church can put you up for tonight, Dr. Anderson continued, lowering his voice. Reverend Timothy has already arranged it. We're going home, James replied, the decision solidifying as he spoke. Back to my place. The doctor's eyebrows rose. You can't be serious. That cabin of yours is barely fit for one, let alone children. And what about Mills? You know I know exactly what Mills will do. James interrupted. That's why I can't leave the property unattended. He met Anderson's concerned gaze. Sarah's buried on that hill. Our dreams are in that soil. I won't abandon it. Anderson sighed, removing his spectacles to polish them with his handkerchief, a habit when confronted with particularly stubborn patients. And the children. What's your plan there? I'll manage, James said, though the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. "You'll need supplies. Food, medicine for the boy." Anderson hesitated. "I can provide the medicine, but as for the rest, I've got hands that work and skills to trade," James responded, a hint of his old pride surfacing. "I was a blacksmith before I was a rancher. Tom Maxwell still runs the forge in town. He might have work." The doctor nodded slowly. "Maxwell's one of the few not beholden to mills. But temporary work won't solve the larger problem, James. Those children need a proper homeschooling stability." "And they'll have it," James said with more conviction than he felt. "One step at a time." As they prepared to leave, Reverend Timothy arrived with a small bundle children's clothes donated by his congregation, a loaf of bread and a jar of preserved peaches. The simple generosity brought an unexpected tightness to James's throat. "The Lord provides," Timothy said simply, handing the bundle to James. "Sometimes through the hands of neighbors." "Some neighbors," James muttered, thinking of the 12 doors that had closed before his opened. Timothy's eyes crinkled with understanding. "Hard times reveal character, James, both the lack of it and the presence of it." He knelt to Mary's level. "You take care of your brother, young lady, and remember, the church door is always open." Mary nodded solemnly. "Mama said God doesn't turn people away like people do." "Your mama was a wise woman," Timothy replied, his gentle smile faltering only slightly at the present tense the girl had used. He straightened, turning back to James. "Sheriff Bennett is watching the road. Mills has him checking everyone leaving town today." James's jaw tightened. "Looking for us, specifically?" "So it would seem. I'd suggest the old logging trail past Miller's Creek. It's longer, but less traveled." With the children bundled in their donated clothes and Samuel wrapped in an extra blanket, they set out through the back streets of Oak Ridge. The town was quiet, many homes showing signs of neglect, peeling paint, sagging porches, gardens long since surrendered to frost and disuse. James felt eyes watching from behind curtains, the weight of judgment and curiosity. They had nearly reached the edge of town when a figure stepped into their path. Martha Sullivan, the widow who ran the town's small general store. She was a thin, weathered woman whose husband had been the first casualty of the mill's closure, falling from the upper scaffolding during the final week of operation. "Walker," she acknowledged, her gaze moving to the children. Word travels fast in Oak Ridge. James tensed, prepared for more opposition, but Martha surprised him by extending a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Wool socks," she explained. "Hand-knit, too small for my boys now." Her voice softened. "I heard the little one has pneumonia. Keep his feet warm." "Thank you," James said, genuinely moved by the unexpected kindness. Martha nodded briskly. "Mills was in the store earlier, asking questions about you and the children. Said there might be a reward for information." Her mouth tightened. "I told him I mind my own business and he should too." James absorbed this information with growing unease. Did he say what kind of information he's looking for? He's trying to find out where the children came from, their family name, who their people might be. She lowered her voice. "Be careful, Walker. Mills doesn't involve himself in charity. If he's interested in these little ones, he has a reason." As they continued toward the logging trail, James mulled over Martha's warning. Mills's interest in the children went beyond his usual harassment. The bank president had never shown concern for the welfare of Oak Ridge's struggling citizens before, quite the opposite. His sudden humanitarian interest in 2 orphans was suspicious at best. The old logging trail was overgrown but still passable. James carried Samuel for most of the journey, the boy's slight weight a burden he welcomed. Mary walked beside them, occasionally reaching up to touch her brother's dangling hand, as if reassuring herself he was still there. "Mr. Walker," she asked after they had been walking for nearly an hour, "is your house far?" "About 3 more miles," James answered. "And you can call me James." She considered this, her small face serious. "James," she tested, then nodded as if approving the familiarity. "Will the bad man find us at your house?" James looked down sharply. "What bad man, Mary?" "The one in the nice coat. The one who wants to take us away." Her voice remained steady, but her fingers tightened around her doll. "He has eyes like my father." The comparison sent a chill through James that had nothing to do with the winter air. "Mills," he said. "His name is Harold Mills. And no, he won't find you at my place. It's up high away from town." Mary nodded, seemingly satisfied. After a moment she spoke again. "Our father wasn't a good man. That's why Mama took us away." James digested this new information carefully. "Where did you come from before the Riley farm?" "St. Louis," Mary answered. "Mama was a nurse there. But Father found us, so we had to leave in the night. We rode on 3 different trains. Mama said we had to go somewhere small, where nobody would look for us." The pieces began to align in James's mind, a mother fleeing with her children seeking anonymity in a remote farming community, taking work as a tenant farmer despite being trained as a nurse. It wasn't an uncommon story in these desperate times, but it suggested a threat more specific than general hardship. "Your father," James ventured carefully, "is he looking for you?" Mary's expression shuddered. "Mama said he wouldn't find us. She said we were safe now." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "But I don't think we are." They reached the cabin as afternoon light was fading to evening. Samuel had fallen asleep in James's arms, his breathing still labored but steadier than the day before. Mary stood looking at the small structure, her expression unreadable. "It's not much," James admitted, suddenly seeing his home through new eyes. The weathered logs, the single window, the roof that needed patching before the next heavy snow. "It has a door," Mary said simply. "And a chimney. Mama said that's all you really need." Inside, James rekindled the fire, while Mary arranged their few possessions with the careful precision of a child who had learned to value what little she had. She placed her doll on the shelf beside Sarah's photograph, then paused, studying the image. "Is that your wife?" she asked. James nodded, surprised by the lack of pain the question brought. "Her name was Sarah. She died last winter." Mary touched the frame gently. "She's pretty, like an angel." "She was," James agreed. He didn't correct the girl's assumption that Sarah had been beautiful in life rather than just in the photograph. Some mercies were small but necessary. "Is she in heaven with Mama?" Mary asked. James hadn't considered heaven much, in the past year his faith another casualty of grief. But looking at Mary's earnest face, he found himself unwilling to impose his doubt on her hope. "I expect so," he said. They'd have a lot to talk about. Mary smiled for the first time since he'd met her, a small, fleeting expression that transformed her solemn face. "Maybe they're friends now." The thought of Sarah and this unknown woman, Grace Mary, had called her finding companionship in whatever lay beyond, brought an unexpected comfort. 2 mothers watching over their loved ones, sharing the burden of protection. That night, after a simple meal of bread and Dr. Anderson's preserved peaches, James arranged the quilt near the hearth for the children. Mary helped Samuel into the new wool socks, then curled protectively around him as she had the night before. "Will you tell us a story?" she asked, the request so normal, so childlike, that it caught James off guard. "I don't know many stories," he admitted. "That's okay. Mama always made them up." Mary's eyes were already drifting closed, the exhaustion of their journey claiming her. She said, "Stories are just memories you haven't had yet." James sat in the chair by the fire long after the children had fallen asleep, turning Mary's words over in his mind. Memories you haven't had yet. The phrase seemed to encapsulate everything he'd lost when Sarah died, the future they'd planned, the children they'd hoped for, the stories they would never create together. And yet, here were two children sleeping by his hearth. Not the family he'd imagined, not the life he'd planned, but something unexpected and fragile. A story he hadn't anticipated. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the single window. James added another log to the fire and allowed himself, for the first time in many months, to consider a future beyond mere survival. The following days established a tentative rhythm. James rose before dawn to tend the fire and check the perimeter of his property, hyper-aware of Mill's interest and the vulnerability of his new charges. Mary proved surprisingly capable, taking over simple household tasks without being asked. She swept the cabin floor, washed their few dishes, and helped James prepare meals from their limited stores. Samuel's health improved gradually. The pneumonia receded, though a lingering cough remained. More concerning to James was the boy's continued silence. He communicated through gestures and expressions, but no words passed his lips. "Has he always been this quiet?" James asked on the fourth morning as they sat eating porridge. Mary shook her head. "He used to talk all the time. Mama said he was her little chatterbox." Her face clouded. "But after she got sick, he stopped. I think he's afraid if he talks bad things will happen." James studied the boy, who was methodically spooning porridge into his mouth, his eyes downcast. "What kind of bad things?" Mary hesitated, glancing at her brother protectively. When Father was angry, he would hurt Samuel more if he cried or made noise. He said Samuel wasn't really his son, so he didn't have to listen to him. The casual cruelty of the statement made James's jaw tighten. "Your father said that in front of Samuel." Mary nodded. "That's why we left. Father was going to send Samuel away to an orphanage, but keep me." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Mama said she'd die before she let that happen." And she had died, James thought grimly. Whether from illness or something more sinister, the result was the same two children left vulnerable in a world that had little mercy for the weak. "Samuel is safe here," James said, the conviction in his voice surprising even himself. "No one is going to hurt either of you or send you away. You understand that, don't you?" Samuel looked up, then his solemn eyes meeting James's for the first time. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "That's right," James continued, maintaining the connection. "This is your home now, for as long as you need it." The boy's eyes widened slightly at the word home. A flicker of something hope, perhaps, crossing his face before he returned his attention to his porridge. Later that morning, while Mary helped Samuel with a bath in the tin washtub, James took stock of their supplies. The flour sack was nearly empty, the last of the preserved vegetables gone. They had enough for perhaps 2 more days before hunger would become a pressing concern. He needed to find work, and quickly. The thought of returning to Oak Ridge filled him with apprehension. Mills would certainly be watching, but there was no alternative. The nearest neighboring farm was 10 miles away, and with winter deepening travel would only become more difficult. "I need to go into town," he told Mary as she dressed Samuel in his clean clothes, "to find work. Will you be all right here for a few hours?" Fear flashed across her face. "You're coming back, aren't you?" "Of course I am," James assured her, troubled by the immediacy of her concern. "I just need to arrange some work so we can buy food." Mary bit her lip, clearly struggling with the prospect of being left alone. "What if the bad man comes while you're gone?" "Mills won't come up here," James said, though he wasn't entirely confident. "But just in case, I'll show you a safe place to hide." He led the children to the old root cellar behind the cabin, a small space dug into the hillside where Sarah had once stored their harvest. It was empty now, but dry and well concealed by overgrown brush. "If anyone comes that isn't me, you hide in here," James instructed, showing them how the heavy wooden door could be barred from the inside. "Don't come out until you hear me call for you." Mary nodded, absorbing the instructions with the seriousness of a soldier receiving orders. Samuel clung to her hand, his eyes darting nervously between the cellar and the surrounding forest. "I'll be back before dark," James promised. "Keep the door locked and stay quiet." The walk to Oak Ridge took longer than usual, James's thoughts continually returning to the children alone in his cabin. By the time he reached Tom Maxwell's blacksmith shop on the edge of town, it was nearly noon. The forge was active smoke billowing from the chimney. The rhythmic clang of hammer on metal greeted James as he approached the open doors. Tom Maxwell stood at the anvil, his massive frame silhouetted against the glow of the forge. Despite being well into his 60s, the blacksmith's arms were corded with muscle, his leathery face a testament to decades of working with fire and iron. He looked up as James entered, recognition dawning in his weathered features. "Walker," he acknowledged, setting down his hammer. "Heard you were in town yesterday, with children." News traveled fast in small communities, especially news that involved Harold Mills' interests. "I need work, Tom," James said, dispensing with preliminaries. "Whatever you can spare." Maxwell studied him for a long moment, shrewd eyes taking in James's worn clothing and the new determination in his stance. "Mills was in here this morning, asking questions about you and those orphans." "And what did you tell him?" "That I mind my forge and he should mind his bank." Maxwell wiped his hands on his leather apron. "But he's not letting this go, Walker. Says those children need proper authorities to look after them." James felt a familiar anger rising. "Mills doesn't give a damn about those children. He wants my land, and he's using them as leverage." Maxwell nodded slowly. "Figured as much. That damn project of his needs your water rights." He sighed heavily. "I can use help 3 days a week. Pays not much, $5 a day, but it's honest work." Relief coursed through James. $5 a day would mean flour beans, perhaps even milk for the children. "I'll take it. When can I start?" "Right now, if you're willing." Maxwell gestured to a pile of metal rod stock. "Got an order for iron fencing that needs filling by week's end." James removed his coat and rolled up his sleeves. The familiar environment of the forge, the heat, the smell of coal and hot metal, the weight of tools in his hands brought back memories of his time as an apprentice in his youth. Before the war, before Sarah, before dreams of land and cattle had taken root. He worked steadily through the afternoon, muscles remembering patterns his mind had nearly forgotten. The physical labor was a welcome distraction from the worries that had plagued him since the children's arrival. Here, at least, was something straightforward metal that bent to his will if approached with the right technique and sufficient force. As evening approached, Maxwell paid him for the day's work $5 silver that James tucked carefully into his pocket. He stopped at Martha Sullivan's general store on his way out of town, purchasing flour beans, salt pork, and after a moment's consideration, a small bag of peppermint candies. Martha raised an eyebrow at the latter. "Sweet Tooth Walker never took you for one with a taste for candy." "It's for the children," he admitted. Her expression softened. "How are they settling in?" "As well as can be expected. The boy's health is improving." Martha nodded, then leaned forward across the counter. Mills was in again today, with Sheriff Bennett. They were talking about sending someone up to your place for an inspection. She made quotation marks in the air with her fingers. Said it was about ensuring the welfare of minors. Ames's jaw tightened. When, didn't say exactly, but soon I'd wager. She hesitated. James, be careful. Mills isn't just after your land anymore. He seems personally invested in this matter with the children. It's not like him. The warning churned in James's mind as he hurried back toward his cabin, daylight already fading. What was Mills's angle? The bank president had never shown interest in orphans or child welfare before. His single-minded pursuit of the dam project was well known throughout the county, but this fixation on Mary and Samuel suggested something more. James was halfway up the mountain trail when he heard a distant crack that could only be a rifle shot. His blood turned cold. The sound had come from the direction of his cabin. He broke into a run, supplies clutched against his chest, breath coming in white clouds in the frigid air. Another shot rang out, followed by a man's angry shout. The words were indistinct, but the tone was unmistakable, threatening, demanding. James veered off the main trail, taking a steeper path that would bring him to the back of his property. His lungs burned with exertion, but fear drove him forward. Had Mills sent men to take the children? Had they found the root cellar? As he crested the final rise, James dropped low, moving through the underbrush with the stealth he'd learned in the trenches of France. His cabin came into view, and with it, the source of the disturbance. 3 men stood in the yard, strangers not from Oak Ridge. Their horses were tethered to a nearby pine saddlebags, bulging with what looked like supplies for a longer journey. One man held a rifle, pointing it toward the cabin door. Another was shouting his words now clear in the still mountain air. "We know you're in there, girl. Bring your brother out, and nobody gets hurt." James's chest constricted. These weren't Mills's men. This was something else entirely. He scanned the area, relieved to see no sign of the children. They must have followed his instructions and hidden in the root cellar. The third man, taller than the others, and wearing a city suit beneath his overcoat, stepped forward. "Mary!" He called, his voice carrying a false gentleness that raised the hair on James's neck. "It's your father. I've come to take you home, sweetheart. Don't you want to come home?" Father. The word landed like a physical blow. Mary's father, the man she'd fled with her mother, the man who had hurt Samuel and threatened to separate them. He had found them, just as Mary had feared. James set down his supplies silently and circled toward the root cellar, staying low and out of sight. The brush concealing the entrance appeared undisturbed, but he needed to be certain the children were safe before confronting the intruders. He reached the cellar door and tapped softly their agreed-upon signal. After a moment, the bar inside lifted, and Mary's frightened face appeared in the narrow opening. "James," she whispered, relief and terror mingling in her voice. "It's him. It's Father." "I know," James murmured. "Stay here. Keep the door barred. Don't come out until I call for you, no matter what you hear. Understand?" She nodded, her small face pale in the dimming light. Samuel appeared behind her, his eyes wide with fear, his small body trembling. James squeezed Mary's hand once, then closed the cellar door, hearing the bar slide back into place. He straightened, anger replacing fear. These men had come to his property, fired weapons, threatened children under his protection. Whatever legal claim the father might have had was negated by his actions, by Mary's account of abuse, by his abandonment, by the very fact that he'd brought armed men to intimidate a 7-year-old girl. James stepped from the cover of the trees, deliberately making noise to draw their attention away from the cabin. All three men turned the rifleman swinging his weapon toward the new threat. "This is private property," James called, his voice steady, despite the rage building inside him. "And you're trespassing." The well-dressed man, Mary's father, stepped forward. Up close, James could see the resemblance to Samuel in his features, though the boy's gentle eyes were nothing like the cold calculation in this man's gaze. "You must be Walker," he said, a slight accent coloring his words, St. Louis, perhaps, or further east. "I'm Frank Thompson. Those children you're harboring are my son and daughter. I've come to take them home." "They are home," James replied. "Their mother brought them here for a reason." Thompson's expression hardened. "My wife was mentally unstable. She kidnapped my children during a psychotic episode. Surely you've noticed the girl's strange behavior, her paranoid fantasies." "I've noticed she's terrified of you," James countered, "and that the boy stops speaking whenever your name is mentioned." The rifleman shifted impatiently. "Enough talk, Frank. Let's search the cabin, find the brats, and be on our way." Thompson held up a hand. "A moment, Vince." He turned back to James. "I understand you might have grown attached to my children. They can be quite charming when they want to be, but they belong with their father." "Children don't belong with men who hurt them," James said flatly. Something dangerous flashed in Thompson's eyes. "You're making accusations you can't support, Mr. Walker. I have legal documentation proving my paternity and custody." He reached into his coat, producing an official-looking paper. "Signed by a judge in St. Louis County. The children are legally mine." James didn't bother looking at the document. "If you have legal claim, why bring guns? Why not go through the sheriff? Because local authorities often interfere in family matters they don't understand," Thompson replied smoothly. "I prefer to handle this privately." "Nothing about threatening children with rifles is private or legal," James said, taking a step forward. "Get off my land." The third man, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. "Frank, we're wasting time. The boy's the one you want. The girl's expendable, just like her mother." The casual cruelty of the statement confirmed everything Mary had told him. These men hadn't come to reunite a family, they'd come to separate one, to take Samuel for reasons James couldn't fathom, but instinctively knew were sinister. "No one is taking either child," James stated, his hand moving subtly toward the axe handle protruding from the woodpile beside him. "Not today, not ever." Thompson sighed, as if disappointed by a business negotiation gone sour. "I was hoping to resolve this amicably, but if you insist on being difficult—" He nodded to the rifleman. "Vince, find the children. Check any outbuildings, root cellars, wherever they might hide." The rifleman grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "With pleasure." As Vince moved toward the side of the cabin where the root cellar lay hidden, James made his decision. He grabbed the axe handle and lunged forward, bringing it down hard across the rifleman's arms. The man cried out in pain, the rifle discharging harmlessly into the ground as it fell from his grasp. The third man rushed James, a knife appearing in his hand. James pivoted, using the momentum of his first strike to swing the axe handle in a wide arc that caught his new attacker across the temple. The man dropped like a stone, unconscious, before he hit the frozen earth. Thompson had retreated several steps, his hand now holding a small revolver. "I underestimated you, Walker," he said, the false charm gone from his voice. "Mills said you were a broken man, living alone, with ghosts." The mention of Mills sent a jolt through James. "Mills? What does the bank have to do with this?" Thompson's smile was cold. "Harold Mills and I have a mutually beneficial arrangement. He gets your land for his dam, I get my son back, and you get, well, nothing. That was the agreement." "What do you want with Samuel?" James demanded, the axe handle still gripped tightly in his fist. "Mary said you denied he was even your son." "Because he isn't," Thompson replied matter-of-factly. "But he's the sole heir to his maternal grandfather's estate, a fact my dear wife tried to hide from me. The old man died 6 months ago, leaving everything to his grandson Samuel. A considerable fortune that rightfully belongs to me as the boy's legal father." The pieces aligned with sickening clarity. This wasn't about fatherly love or family reunification, it was about money. Thompson needed Samuel to access an inheritance, and Mills had somehow connected him with the children's whereabouts in exchange for James's land. "You won't touch either of those children," James said, advancing slowly. Thompson raised the revolver, aiming it squarely at James's chest. "Don't be a hero, Walker. Heroes end up dead, and those children will still be mine." The gunshot that followed echoed across the mountainside, startling birds from the trees and sending them wheeling into the darkening sky. The gunshot came not from Thompson's revolver, but from behind James. He turned to see Sheriff Bennett emerging from the tree line, his service pistol raised. "That's enough," Bennett called, his weathered face grim in the fading light. "Next one won't be a warning shot." Thompson lowered his weapon slowly, his calculating eyes now fixed on the sheriff. This is a private family matter, officer. I'm simply retrieving my children from this kidnapper." Bennett's expression remained impassive. "Strange way to retrieve family, bringing armed men onto private property." He glanced at the unconscious figure on the ground and the rifleman nursing his injured arms. "Put the gun down, mister, and let's discuss this civilly." For a moment, James thought Thompson might refuse. Something dangerous flickered in the man's eyes, a cornered predator weighing his options. Then, with deliberate slowness, he placed the revolver on the ground. "Sheriff Bennett, I presume." Thompson straightened, adjusting his suit coat with the practiced composure of someone accustomed to navigating difficult situations. "Frank Thompson, I have court documents proving my paternity and legal custody of the children this man is harboring." Bennett approached cautiously, keeping his pistol trained on Thompson while retrieving the discarded revolver. "Documents can wait. First, I want to know why Harold Mills sent me up here claiming Walker was mistreating orphans, when what I find is 3 armed men threatening him on his own property." James felt a surge of surprise. "Mills sent you?" The sheriff nodded grimly. "Said you were in over your head with those orphans, that someone should check on their welfare." He glanced around the clearing. "Where are the children, Walker?" Before James could answer, a small voice called from the direction of the root cellar. "We're here." Mary stood in the open doorway of their hiding place. Samuel clutched protectively behind her. Despite James's instructions to stay hidden, the children had emerged, perhaps drawn by the familiar voice of authority, or simply unable to bear the suspense any longer. Thompson took a step toward them, his face transforming into a mask of paternal concern. "Mary, sweetheart, you've had your adventure, but it's time to come home now." Mary shrank back, pulling Samuel with her. "You're not our father," she said, her voice small but clear. "Our real father wouldn't hurt Samuel." Thompson's expression hardened momentarily before smoothing back into calculated charm. "Children say the strangest things when they're confused, don't they? Sheriff, my wife filled their heads with stories before she passed." Bennett looked between Thompson and the children, then to James. "This is getting complicated fast. I think we'd better continue this conversation in town, where Judge Parker can sort it out properly." "I have legal documents," Thompson began. "And I have 2 scared children and a man defending his property from armed intruders," Bennett interrupted. "We'll let the judge decide whose papers matter more." The rifleman Vince had regained his composure enough to protest. You can't be serious. You're just a country sheriff. Do you know who you're dealing with? Mr. Thompson is a respected businessman in St. Louis. In St. Louis, maybe that matters, Bennett replied evenly. In Oak Ridge, what matters is that you're trespassing with firearms. He turned to James. Get the children ready. You're all coming to town. As James gathered Mary and Samuel collecting the few belongings they'd acquired, he noticed Thompson engaged in quiet conversation with the sheriff. Money changed hands, not a bribe, but something that looked like payment for services. A cold suspicion formed in James's mind. "Bennett," he called, interrupting their exchange. "Are you on Mills's payroll?" The sheriff's face tightened. "Watch yourself, Walker. I'm still the law here." "Didn't answer my question," James persisted. "Seems strange you'd show up just as Thompson mentions his arrangement with Mills." "I followed Thompson and his men from town," Bennett replied stiffly, "after Martha Sullivan mentioned seeing strangers asking about your place." James wasn't entirely convinced, but he had more immediate concerns. Mary was trembling as she helped Samuel with his coat, her eyes darting fearfully toward Thompson. "It's going to be all right," James assured her, though he felt far from certain. "We're going to tell the truth, and the judge will listen." Mary looked up at him, doubt clear in her young face. "Father never listens. He gets what he wants." "Not this time," James promised, a determination settling in his chest. "Not with me here." The journey to Oak Ridge was tense and silent. Bennett had handcuffed Thompson's companions and loaded them onto their horses, which he led behind his own mount. Thompson himself rode separately, maintaining a dignified posture despite the circumstances. James walked with the children, Mary holding his hand tightly, while Samuel clung to her other side. It was fully dark by the time they reached town. A small crowd had gathered outside the sheriff's office, word having spread about the commotion on Walker's property. James recognized familiar faces: Dr. Anderson, Tom Maxwell, Martha Sullivan, and others who had shown varying degrees of kindness or indifference to his situation. Reverend Timothy emerged from the crowd, moving directly to James's side. "I came as soon as I heard," he said quietly. "Judge Parker is already at the courthouse. Mills made sure of that." James nodded grimly. "Thompson and Mills are working together. This was planned." Timothy's eyebrows rose. "That explains a great deal. Mills has been unusually active today, making phone calls to the county seat, having private meetings." Sheriff Bennett ushered them all toward the small courthouse at the end of Main Street, a simple wooden building that doubled as a town hall. Inside, oil lamps cast long shadows across the worn benches and scarred wooden rails that separated the public from the judge's bench. Judge William Parker sat waiting, his gaunt face severe beneath thinning white hair. At 68, he was the oldest serving official in the county, known for his strict interpretation of the law and impatience with emotional appeals. That he was present for an evening hearing spoke volumes about Mills' influence. Harold Mills himself sat in the front row, his expensive wool coat and polished shoes standing out amid the worn attire of the townspeople who had followed inside. He showed no surprise at Thompson's presence, merely a slight nod of recognition. "Sheriff Bennett," Judge Parker began, his voice reedy but authoritative. "Explain the nature of this emergency session." Bennett outlined the situation in clipped professional terms, the reports of orphaned children, Walker taking them in concerns about their welfare, and finally the armed confrontation at Walker's cabin. Thompson was permitted to speak next, presenting his documentation with the confidence of someone accustomed to legal proceedings. "My wife, Grace, suffered a mental breakdown after our son's birth," he explained smoothly. "When her condition worsened, she took the children and fled. I've been searching for them for months, only to discover they've been living in squalor, with a man who has no legal right to them. Judge Parker examined the papers carefully. These appear to be in order. Birth certificates naming you as father, custody declaration, following your wife's commitment to an asylum for the insane. He looked up, eyes sharp. Why bring armed men to retrieve your children, Mr. Thompson? Why not simply present these documents to the local authorities? Thompson's expression conveyed practiced regret. I received information that Walker was unstable, potentially dangerous. I brought protection for myself and my children. That information came from me, Mills interjected, rising from his seat. James Walker has been living as a virtual hermit since his wife's death. His mental state has been questionable, and his cabin is hardly suitable for children. As a concerned citizen and president of the bank that holds Mr. Walker's mortgage, I felt obligated to alert Mr. Thompson when I learned the children's identity. James stepped forward. This is a fabrication, he stated firmly. Mills wants my land for his dam project. He's using these children as leverage. The judge frowned. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Walker. It's the truth, James insisted. Ask Thompson what he really wants with Samuel. Ask him about the inheritance. A flicker of surprise crossed Thompson's face before he regained his composure. Mr. Walker is clearly delusional. I simply want my children returned to me where they belong. Then why did you tell me Samuel isn't your son? James challenged. Why mention his grandfather's estate? Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Judge Parker rapped his gavel sharply. Order, Mr. Thompson, do you wish to respond to these allegations? Thompson's smile was tight. Mr. Walker is attempting to muddy the waters with falsehoods. I never said any such thing. Let's hear from the children, Reverend Timothy suggested, stepping forward. Surely their testimony matters in this case. Judge Parker seemed about to refuse, but the crowd's murmurs grew louder. Finally, he nodded. Very well. The girl may approach. Mary came forward slowly, her small figure dwarfed by the wooden witness stand. She glanced nervously at Thompson, then at James, who nodded encouragingly. Young lady, Judge Parker began, his tone softening slightly. Do you understand why you're here tonight? Yes, sir, Mary replied, her voice barely audible. He wants to take us away. She pointed at Thompson without looking at him. That man is your father according to these documents, the judge explained. Mary shook her head vigorously. He hurt Samuel. He burned him with cigarettes because he said Samuel wasn't his real son. A shocked silence fell over the courtroom. Thompson surged to his feet. This is outrageous. The girl has been coached to say these things. Is that true, Mary? Judge Parker asked, ignoring Thompson's outburst. Did this man hurt your brother? Mary nodded, tears welling in her eyes. He said Samuel was a bastard who didn't deserve his name. That's why Mama took us away. She said we had to find somewhere safe. The girl is repeating her mother's delusions, Thompson insisted. Grace was paranoid, imagining threats. Show them Samuel, Mary interrupted, turning to her brother, who stood clutching James's hand. Show them what he did to you. All eyes turned to the small boy who looked up at James with terrified uncertainty. James knelt beside him. It's all right, he said gently. No one will hurt you here. The truth will keep you safe. With trembling fingers, Samuel unbuttoned his shirt and turned, revealing a pattern of circular scars across his small back. Unmistakable cigarette burns, some old and faded, others still pink with recent healing. Gasps and murmurs filled the courtroom. Martha Sullivan pressed a handkerchief to her mouth, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. Dr. Anderson stepped forward immediately, examining the injuries with professional detachment that couldn't quite hide his horror. "These are deliberate burns," he confirmed for the court. "Multiple incidents over what appears to be months, if not years." Thompson's face had drained of color, but he recovered quickly. "I don't know how he got those marks. Perhaps his mother—" Samuel James interrupted, still kneeling beside the boy. "Who did this to you?" For the first time since James had met him, Samuel spoke. His voice was soft but clear, his small finger pointing directly at Thompson. "Him, when Mama wasn't looking." The courtroom erupted in angry voices. Judge Parker pounded his gavel repeatedly, calling for order. Mills had sunk back into his seat, visibly distancing himself from Thompson, whose carefully constructed facade was crumbling. As the commotion continued, the courthouse door swung open. A woman entered, tall, auburn-haired, dressed in a nurse's uniform beneath her winter coat. She moved purposefully to the front of the room, ignoring the stares and whispers. "Your Honor," she addressed the judge directly. "My name is Rebecca Wilson. I was Grace Thompson's supervisor at St. Joseph's Hospital in St. Louis. I have information relevant to this case." Thompson's face contorted with genuine shock. "What is this? Who are you?" Rebecca ignored him, focusing on the judge. "Grace Thompson was not mentally ill, Your Honor. She was a dedicated nurse who fled an abusive husband to protect her children. Before she left, she entrusted me with documentation in case anything happened to her." She produced a sealed envelope from her coat. "This contains Grace's sworn affidavit detailing the abuse medical records of her own injuries and, most importantly, a paternity test proving that Frank Thompson is not Samuel's biological father." Thompson lunged toward her, only to be restrained by Sheriff Bennett. "She's lying. This is a conspiracy." Judge Parker accepted the envelope, breaking the seal, and examining its contents with deliberate care. The courtroom waited in tense silence, broken only by Thompson's continued protests and Samuel's quiet whimpers as James helped him button his shirt. Finally, the judge looked up, his expression grave. "These documents appear authentic. Hospital records, signed affidavits from colleagues, and indeed laboratory results excluding Mr. Thompson as the boy's father." He fixed Thompson with a cold stare. "Furthermore, there is no record of Grace Thompson ever being committed to an asylum. Your custody documents appear to be forgeries." Mills rose again smoothly, distancing himself from the situation. "Your Honor, I had no knowledge of these circumstances. I was merely acting on information provided to me regarding orphaned children in need." "Were you indeed?" Judge Parker's tone suggested skepticism. "Then perhaps you can explain why you specifically connected Mr. Thompson with these children, despite having no prior knowledge of their identity." Before Mills could respond, Rebecca spoke again. "Grace told me about Harold Mills, Your Honor. He was Frank's business associate in St. Louis. They were involved in real estate developments together, projects that often involved displacing vulnerable communities through questionable means." Mills's composed expression faltered. "This is hearsay and completely irrelevant to the matter at hand." "Perhaps," Judge Parker conceded, "but it does establish a prior connection that contradicts your claim of coincidental involvement." He turned to Bennett. "Sheriff, I believe we have sufficient cause to detain Mr. Thompson, pending further investigation into charges of child abuse, document forgery, and attempted kidnapping." As Bennett moved to formally arrest Thompson, the man's careful veneer finally shattered completely. "This is Mills's fault," he shouted, struggling against the sheriff's grip. "He promised me this would be simple, said Walker was a broken man who wouldn't fight back, said the judge was in his pocket." Judge Parker's face darkened at this last accusation. "Add attempted bribery of a judicial official to the charges, Sheriff, and I believe Mr. Mills should remain for questioning as well." Mills's protests were cut short by the judge's gavel. This court will reconvene tomorrow morning to address the custody of the children and the various allegations that have emerged tonight. Until then, Mr. Thompson will remain in custody. He looked at James. Mr. Walker, as the adult who has been caring for these children, you may continue to do so temporarily, pending tomorrow's hearing. Relief washed over James, though he knew this was only a temporary reprieve. The legal battle for Mary and Samuel was just beginning, complicated by questions of inheritance guardianship and his own precarious financial situation. As the courthouse emptied, Rebecca Wilson approached James and the children. Mary stared at her with wide, uncertain eyes. "You knew, Mama?" she asked softly. Rebecca nodded, kneeling to the girl's level. "I worked with her at the hospital. She was very brave and very smart. She loved you both so much." "Why didn't you come sooner?" James asked the question without accusation, merely seeking understanding. "I didn't know where Grace had taken them," Rebecca explained. "She wouldn't tell anyone for safety. It was only when I saw the notice in the regional paper, a man seeking information about a woman and 2 children matching their description, that I realized Frank had tracked them down." She looked at James with genuine gratitude. "I came as quickly as I could. Thank God you were here to protect them." Samuel, still silent, except for his single crucial statement in court, moved tentatively toward Rebecca. He studied her face with solemn intensity, perhaps searching for traces of his mother in this woman who had known her. "Hello, Samuel," Rebecca said gently. "Your mother told me you were her brave little man." To everyone's surprise, Samuel reached out and took Rebecca's hand, a gesture of trust that brought tears to the nurse's eyes. "We should find a place to stay for the night," James said, aware of the late hour and the children's exhaustion. "The cabin's too far to travel back tonight." "The church has rooms prepared," Reverend Timothy offered, joining them. "Rebecca as well. We anticipated you might need safe lodging." As they walked toward the church, Mary slipped her hand into James's. "Are we going to be okay?" She asked the question layered with meanings beyond the immediate situation. James squeezed her small fingers gently. "Yes," he promised. "We're going to be okay." That night, after the children had finally succumbed to exhaustion in the church's small guest room, James sat with Rebecca and Reverend Timothy in the adjacent study. A coal stove provided warmth, and Timothy had produced a bottle of brandy, for medicinal purposes, pouring small glasses for the adults. "Grace mentioned you in her journal," Rebecca said quietly, turning her glass in her hands without drinking. "Not by name, but she wrote about the soldier on the hill who never surrenders. She must have heard about you from locals after she arrived." James felt a strange connection to this woman. He'd never met a mother who had died trying to protect her children, who had somehow seen in him a kindred spirit. "I wish I could have helped her." "You are helping her," Rebecca assured him, "by protecting what mattered most to her." Timothy leaned forward in his chair. "What happens now, legally speaking?" Rebecca sighed. "It's complicated. With Frank's paternity of Samuel disproven, his claim on both children is weakened, but not eliminated. He was legally married to Grace and is listed as Mary's father on her birth certificate. The court could still grant him custody of Mary, especially if they determine James isn't a suitable guardian." "And Samuel?" James asked. "Samuel's biological father is deceased, a Dr. Grace worked with during the war. He never knew about Samuel, and Grace kept the truth hidden to protect her son from Frank's jealousy." Rebecca hesitated. "But there's something else you should know. Samuel's grandfather, his biological father's father, was Jefferson Caldwell." Timothy straightened in his chair. "The railroad magnate." Rebecca nodded. He died 6 months ago, leaving his estate to his grandson Samuel, whom he never met but knew existed through private investigators. That's why Frank has been so desperate to find Samuel. The inheritance is substantial, several $1 million held in trust until Samuel turns 21. The revelation settled heavily in the room. James thought of Thompson's words during their confrontation, a considerable fortune that rightfully belongs to me. So this was never about fatherly love, he said grimly. It was about money. And your land was just a bargaining chip, Timothy added. Mills helped Thompson find the children in exchange for your water rights. The pieces aligned with sickening clarity the confluence of greed, power, and exploitation that had nearly destroyed 2 innocent lives. James felt a familiar anger rising, but beneath it, a steely resolve. How do we protect them? He asked simply. Rebecca set down her untouched brandy. Grace named me as guardian in her will, which I have with me, but she also left a letter. She reached into her bag, withdrawing an envelope with, "In case of my death," written across the front in delicate handwriting. I haven't opened it. It's addressed to whoever is caring for her children. She handed it to James, who accepted it with a strange sense of ceremony. The paper felt substantial in his hands, the final wishes of a mother who had sacrificed everything for her children. He broke the seal carefully and unfolded the single page within. The handwriting was neat, but hurried as if written under pressure. To whoever has shown kindness to my children. If you are reading this, I am gone, and Mary and Samuel are in your care. I do not know your name, but I pray you have a good heart. My children have seen too much cruelty already. Frank will never stop looking for them, especially for Samuel. The inheritance is substantial, but more than that, Frank cannot bear to lose what he considers his property, even a child he despises. I have named my friend Rebecca Wilson as guardian, but distance and circumstances may make this impossible. If you have opened your home to my children, if you have shown them kindness and protection, I ask something more. Consider becoming their guardian legally. Mary is strong but needs gentleness. Samuel speaks little when frightened but has music in his soul. They are good children who deserve a chance at happiness. Whatever you decide, know that a mother's gratitude goes with you. Grace Thompson. James read the letter twice, then handed it to Rebecca and Timothy. The words seemed to hang in the air between them, a mother's final plea, a responsibility he'd never anticipated. I'm not qualified, he said finally. I can barely support myself, let alone 2 children. The bank is threatening foreclosure. My cabin is too small. I have no experience with raising children. And yet, Timothy observed quietly, when those children knocked on your door, you didn't turn them away. That was different. They were starving. Anyone would have... No, Rebecca interrupted gently. Not anyone. Grace knocked on many doors before she found the Riley farm. Mary told me they knocked on 12 doors before yours. Most people choose self-preservation, especially in hard times. James fell silent, remembering Mary's words that first night. Mama said a good man won't turn away a child. The hearing tomorrow will determine temporary custody, Timothy said. With Thompson's credibility destroyed and Rebecca present to verify Grace's wishes, you have a strong case if you want it. What about Mills? James asked. He won't give up easily. My land is still the key to his dam project. Timothy's expression hardened. Mills has overplayed his hand, conspiring with Thompson, attempting to influence the judge. These are serious matters that won't be overlooked. His power in Oak Ridge has limits. As the conversation continued into the night, plans forming and options considered, James found his thoughts returning to the cabin on the hill. He'd gone there after Sarah's death, seeking isolation, a place to nurse his grief away from pitying eyes. He'd never imagined it becoming a home again, certainly not for children who needed far more than he believed he could provide. And yet Mary's solemn eyes and Samuel's tentative trust had awakened something he'd thought died with Sarah, a sense of purpose beyond mere survival, a reason to fight rather than merely endure. Near midnight, James excused himself to check on the children. They slept peacefully in the small guest room, Mary's arm protectively around Samuel, even in slumber. The doll, the one Mary had offered to sell that first night, lay between them, its single button eye reflecting the dim lamplight. James stood watching them, his mind still wrestling with Grace's letter and the responsibility it represented. Could he truly become what these children needed? A guardian, a protector, perhaps. Even a father, the doubt must have shown on his face, for when he turned to leave, he found Rebecca in the doorway observing him quietly. "They trust you," she said simply. "That's rare, after what they've experienced." James glanced back at the sleeping children. Trust isn't enough. They need stability, education, a real home. "Those things can be built," Rebecca replied. "Trust must be earned. You've already done the harder part." Before James could respond, a commotion erupted outside, shouting voices, the heavy tread of boots on the church steps. Reverend Timothy appeared behind Rebecca, his expression grave. "It's the sheriff," he said quietly. "With Mills. They have papers." "What papers?" James demanded, moving protectively toward the children. Timothy's answer was cut short as Sheriff Bennett entered the hallway, followed by Harold Mills and a man James didn't recognize, a city lawyer, judging by his expensive suit and impatient demeanor. "Sorry to disturb at this hour," Bennett said, though his tone suggested little actual regret. "But Mr. Mills has filed an emergency injunction regarding the children." Mills stepped forward, a calculated sympathy in his expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Walker, I understand you've grown attached to these little ones, but with Thompson's credentials in question, the most prudent course is for the county to take temporary custody until matters are settled." "At midnight," Rebecca challenged. When they're finally sleeping peacefully, the lawyer produced a document, handing it to Timothy. "Judge Reynolds from the county seat signed this an hour ago. The children are to be remanded to county care immediately pending further investigation." Timothy scanned the paper, his face darkening. "Judge Reynolds Parker is presiding over this case." "Judge Parker is unavailable," Mills replied smoothly. "As a matter of fact, he's recused himself due to potential conflicts of interest." James understood immediately. "You got to him, threatened him with Thompson's accusation of bribery." Mills ignored the accusation, turning to the sheriff. "Bennett, please execute the order." Bennett hesitated, looking genuinely uncomfortable for the first time. "The children are sleeping. Surely this can wait until morning." "The order specifies immediate removal," the lawyer insisted. "My client is concerned about potential flight risk." James stepped into the doorway, physically blocking access to the room where Mary and Samuel slept. "They're not going anywhere with you. Not tonight. Not ever." Mills sighed, as if disappointed by a business negotiation gone sour. "Always the stubborn one, Walker. This isn't about you or me anymore. It's about following proper legal procedures." "It's about the dam," James countered. "And Samuel's inheritance. You thought you'd get both through Thompson, but now you're scrambling for a new approach." A flicker of surprise crossed Mills' face before his mask of concern returned. "These are wild accusations from a man clearly too emotionally invested to see reason." The tension in the hallway mounted, neither side willing to yield. Behind James, Mary stirred, awakened by the raised voices. Her small face appeared beside him, taking in the scene with the wariness of a child who had learned to expect the worst. "They're going to take us away, aren't they?" she asked quietly. Before James could answer, the church door burst open once more. Tom Maxwell entered, followed by Dr. Anderson and, surprisingly, Judge Parker himself. "What's the meaning of this, Mills?" Parker demanded, his authoritative voice filling the space. "I did not recuse myself from this case." Mills paled slightly. "Judge Reynolds has no jurisdiction here," Parker interrupted, "and would never have signed an order for midnight removal of children without extraordinary cause." He turned to the lawyer. "I suggest you examine that document carefully, sir. Forgery of court orders is a serious offense." The lawyer blanched, suddenly less certain of his position. "My client assured me—" "Your client," Parker cut in coldly, "appears to have misrepresented several crucial facts, as have you by presenting this fraudulent order." Mills's composed facade finally cracked. "This is absurd. I'm simply trying to ensure proper procedures are followed for vulnerable orphans." "Orphans whose mother specifically requested Mr. Walker as guardian," Rebecca stated, producing Grace's letter, "and whose father is currently in custody for abuse and fraud." Mills glanced around, recognizing the shift in power. His gaze hardened as it settled on James. "This isn't over, Walker. That land will be mine, one way or another." "Not tonight, it won't," Maxwell growled, his blacksmith's frame filling the narrow hallway. "And not while we're standing with James." Something in the unified opposition finally penetrated Mill's determination. With a curt nod to the lawyer and sheriff, he retreated, dignity intact, but purpose thwarted. After they had gone, Parker turned to James. "I apologize for this disturbance. Rest assured, tomorrow's hearing will proceed as planned, with me presiding." "How did you know to come?" James asked. Dr. Anderson smiled grimly. "Martha Sullivan overheard Mills and that lawyer at the hotel. She sent word to me, and I fetched the judge and Tom." Parker nodded confirmation. "Mills underestimates the connections in a small town like Oak Ridge. Not everyone is swayed by promises of prosperity from his dam project." As the group dispersed, returning to their homes with promises to reconvene at the courthouse in the morning, James found himself alone with Mary, who had witnessed the entire confrontation. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. She nodded, though her expression remained solemn. "Samuel is still sleeping. He gets tired when he's scared." "I know." James knelt to her level. "Mary, tomorrow at the hearing, the judge will decide who takes care of you and Samuel from now on." "Will it be you?" she asked directly, her eyes searching his face. James hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing on him. "Would you want that?" "Even though my cabin is small and things will be difficult for a while." Mary considered this with the seriousness that seemed to define her. "You shared your bread when you didn't have much. Mama said that's how you know a good person." She paused, then added with childlike certainty, "I think we're supposed to be your family now." The simple statement struck James with unexpected force. Family. The word he'd stopped allowing himself to consider after Sarah's death, the future he'd believed was forever closed to him. "I'll do my best," he promised, the words feeling like a vow. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I'll fight for you and Samuel." Mary nodded, satisfied, and returned to her brother's side. James remained in the doorway, watching over them as the church settled into midnight silence. Outside, a light snow had begun to fall, covering Oak Ridge in a clean, forgiving blanket of white. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, legal proceedings, Mills's continued machinations, the uncertainty of what a judge would consider the children's best interest. But for tonight, in this moment of hard-won peace, James allowed himself to contemplate a future he had never anticipated, a family cobbled together by circumstance, bound by something stronger than blood. As he finally settled into the chair beside their bed, prepared to maintain his vigil until morning, James realized that for the first time since Sarah's death, he was thinking beyond mere survival. He was planning, hoping, seeing possibilities, rather than merely enduring days. These children had come to his door seeking bread, but they had given him something far more valuable in return, a reason to build rather than simply exist. Outside, the snow continued to fall, and somewhere in the distance a train whistle sounded, a reminder of the world beyond Oak Ridge, with all its dangers and opportunities. Whatever tomorrow brought, James knew with certainty that he would face it standing, not kneeling, in surrender. He had promised Mary he would fight for them, and James Walker was above all else a man who kept his promises. Dawn arrived with a brittle clarity sunlight, refracting through ice-laden tree branches outside the church windows. James had dozed fitfully in the chair beside the children's bed, waking at every small sound. Now, as pale morning light filtered into the room, he watched Mary stir her eyes, opening with the immediate awareness of a child accustomed to vigilance. "It's morning," she whispered, careful not to wake Samuel. "Is today when the judge decides?" James nodded, his voice rough from lack of sleep. "Yes, but you don't need to worry." Mary's expression suggested she had learned long ago that adult reassurances were often hollow. "What if they make us go with Father, or to an orphanage?" "That won't happen," James said with more certainty than he felt. "Rebecca has your mother's will, naming her as guardian. And He hesitated, the weight of his decision settling into his bones. "I'm going to ask to be your guardian too, if that's still what you want." The girl studied his face, searching for doubt or hesitation. Finding none, she nodded solemnly. "Samuel will be happy. He likes you." "How can you tell?" James asked. "He hardly speaks." "He watches you," Mary explained simply. "He only watches people he trusts." The observation warmed something in James's chest. Before he could respond, a soft knock came at the door. Rebecca entered, already dressed for court, in a modest navy suit, her auburn hair pinned severely back. "Good morning," she greeted them quietly, noting Samuel's continued slumber. "Reverend Timothy has breakfast prepared. The hearing is set for 9 o'clock." Mary slipped from the bed, careful not to disturb her brother. "Is the bad man Mills going to be there?" Rebecca exchanged a glance with James. "Probably, but he can't hurt you. Judge Parker won't allow it." "And Father," Mary's voice tightened on the word. "He's still in custody," Rebecca assured her. "Sheriff Bennett is bringing him to the hearing, but he'll be supervised at all times." As they prepared for the day ahead, James found himself increasingly aware of the odds stacked against him. Mills wielded enormous influence in Oak Ridge and likely beyond. James himself was an impoverished rancher, a widower with no blood relation to the children and little to offer except his determination to protect them. Over a sparse breakfast of oatmeal and weak coffee, Reverend Timothy outlined what they might expect. "Judge Parker is fair, but he's a stickler for procedure. The most likely outcome is temporary guardianship assigned to either Rebecca or the county pending a more thorough investigation of circumstances." "What about James?" Mary asked, pushing her oatmeal around her bowl without eating. Timothy glanced at James, his expression carefully neutral. "His petition will be considered, but there are practical challenges." "My financial situation," James supplied, unwilling to shield the girl from realities she would soon face regardless. "And the condition of my property." Which wouldn't be an issue if Mills hadn't been squeezing you dry for years, Dr. Anderson interjected, joining them with a medical bag in hand. I need to examine Samuel before court. Make sure he's presentable and check those burns. While the doctor tended to Samuel, who had finally awakened, but remained characteristically quiet, James stepped outside for a moment of solitude. The churchyard was blanketed in fresh snow, unmarked, except for a single set of footprints leading to the road. The bitter cold cleared his head, helping him focus on the challenges ahead. He was so absorbed in thought that he didn't hear Martha Sullivan approach until she spoke directly behind him. "Walker," she greeted, her thin frame bundled against the cold. "Brought these for the children." She handed him a paper-wrapped package. "Nothing fancy, just clean clothes for court. Proper ones." James accepted the unexpected gift, touched by the gesture. "Thank you, Martha. I'm not sure why you're helping us." The widow's weathered face remained impassive, but something softened in her eyes. "Mills foreclosed on my brother's farm last spring. Didn't give him the extra month he begged for, even with the harvest coming in." She adjusted her worn gloves. "Anyone standing against that man has my support, modest as it may be." As Martha turned to leave, she added over her shoulder, "Half the town will be at that courthouse today, not all for Mills, despite what he might think." Her words proved prophetic. By 8:45, the small courthouse was filled beyond capacity. James, with Mary and Samuel beside him, found himself at the center of attention as they made their way to the front row, where Rebecca and Reverend Timothy waited. The children were transformed in their borrowed clothes. Samuel, in a small suit that hung slightly loose on his thin frame, Mary in a simple navy dress with a white collar. They looked like proper town children, rather than the half-wild, desperate waifs who had appeared at James's door less than a week ago. Harold Mills sat across the aisle, flanked by not one but 3 attorneys. He acknowledged James with a curt nod, his expression revealing nothing. The banker's confidence was unnerving. Despite the setbacks of the previous night, he carried himself like a man certain of victory. Frank Thompson was brought in by Sheriff Bennett, handcuffed and considerably less polished than before. His expensive suit was rumpled from a night in the cell, his carefully combed hair disheveled. When he spotted the children, his expression darkened momentarily before he composed himself under the watchful eyes of the court. Judge Parker entered precisely at 9, silencing the murmuring crowd with his presence alone. He settled behind the bench, arranging papers with methodical precision before addressing the room. "This court is now in session to determine temporary custody of the minor children Mary and Samuel Thompson and to address various allegations that have emerged in connection with this case." His steely gaze swept the room. "I'll remind everyone that this is not a trial, but a custody hearing. However, evidence of criminal activity relevant to the children's welfare will be considered." The proceedings began with Rebecca presenting Grace Thompson's will and affidavit. She testified to Grace's sound mental state, directly contradicting Frank's earlier claims about his wife's instability. Grace Thompson was a highly respected surgical nurse who saved countless lives during the influenza epidemic, Rebecca stated firmly. She fled her marriage not from delusion, but from genuine fear for her children's safety, particularly Samuel's. Mills' lead attorney, a sharp-featured man named Donovan, rose to cross-examine. "Miss Wilson, you claim intimate knowledge of the Thompson family situation, yet you lived in St. Louis while they resided elsewhere. How can you be certain of what transpired in their home?" "Because I treated Grace's injuries on 3 separate occasions," Rebecca replied evenly. "Broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder, facial contusions. Each time she claimed household accidents. It wasn't until the 3rd incident that she confided the truth." "Hearsay," Donovan dismissed. "The alleged victim isn't present to corroborate. The medical records are present, Rebecca countered, as are photographs taken as standard procedure for suspected abuse cases. When these photographs were presented showing Grace Thompson's injuries in clinical detail, even Mills seemed discomfited. Judge Parker examined them carefully before returning them to the court file. "The court will now hear from Mr. Walker," he announced. James approached the witness stand, acutely aware of his appearance, worn work clothes that had seen better days, 3-day stubble. He hadn't had time to shave, hands calloused from labor. He cut a sharp contrast to the well-dressed attorneys and officials surrounding him. "Mr. Walker," Judge Parker began, "please explain how the children came into your care." James recounted that first night, the desperate knock, the starving children, his decision to provide shelter. He described Samuel's pneumonia, the discovery of the burns, and the gradual revelations about their circumstances. "And you wish to petition for guardianship?" the judge asked. "I do," James affirmed. "Mary and Samuel need stability and protection. I can provide both." Donovan rose immediately. "Your Honor, while Mr. Walker's compassion is commendable, his suitability as a guardian is questionable at best. He lives in a one-room cabin without proper facilities. He is facing foreclosure proceedings. By his own admission, he was barely supporting himself before taking in 2 dependent children." "Those circumstances are temporary," James countered. "I've secured employment with Tom Maxwell. The cabin can be expanded. As for the foreclosure—" He paused, meeting Mills' gaze directly. "That situation developed under suspicious circumstances that this court should examine." Mills's attorney scoffed. "Mr. Walker is attempting to deflect from his financial insolvency by casting aspersions on the bank's standard procedures." Judge Parker raised a hand, silencing further argument. "The court will now hear from Mary Thompson in chambers." He looked at the girl kindly. "Would you feel comfortable speaking with me privately, young lady?" Mary glanced at James, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes, sir," she replied, though her small fingers tightened around Samuel's hand. "Your brother may accompany you," the judge added, noting their obvious attachment. As the children followed Judge Parker to his chambers, an unexpected commotion arose at the back of the courtroom. Heads turned as the doors swung open to admit a distinguished-looking, elderly man in an expensive overcoat, accompanied by 2 younger men who carried themselves with the unmistakable bearing of private security. The newcomer surveyed the room with sharp eyes, finally fixing his gaze on Mills, who had half risen from his seat in evident surprise. "Harrison Caldwell," Mills murmured, loud enough for those nearby to hear. The name sent a ripple through the courtroom. Harrison Caldwell, brother of the deceased Jefferson Caldwell, the railroad magnate mentioned as Samuel's grandfather. His presence changed the dynamics instantly, introducing an element of power that even Mills couldn't dismiss. Caldwell made his way to the front, nodding curtly to Rebecca, who clearly recognized him. "Miss Wilson, thank you for your telegram. I came as quickly as my health would permit." While they waited for the judge and children to return, a tense silence filled the courtroom, broken only by whispered speculation. Frank Thompson stared at Caldwell with undisguised hostility, while Mills' attorneys conferred urgently among themselves. When Judge Parker returned with Mary and Samuel, he raised an eyebrow at Caldwell's presence, but made no comment. The children returned to their seats beside James Mary, whispering something in his ear that made him nod gravely. "The court has heard from the children," Judge Parker announced. "I will now entertain final arguments regarding temporary custody." Rebecca's attorney spoke first, presenting her case as Grace's designated guardian and friend. Mills's attorneys followed, arguing for county custody until proper investigations can be completed. James, representing himself, spoke simply of his commitment to the children's welfare and his growing attachment to them. Then Harrison Caldwell rose, commanding attention without raising his voice. "Your Honor, I request permission to address the court on behalf of my grandnephew Samuel." Judge Parker considered briefly before nodding. "Proceed, Mr. Caldwell, though I'll remind you that you have not been recognized as a party to this case." "I am here to establish myself as a party to this case," Caldwell stated firmly. "Samuel is my brother Jefferson's grandson and legal heir. Jefferson passed away 6 months ago, leaving his estate to Samuel in trust. I am the trustee of that estate and have a vested interest in the boy's welfare." Frank Thompson lunged to his feet, straining against his handcuffs. "You have no right. The boy has been raised as my son. The boy you abused and denied," Caldwell countered coldly. "The same boy whose inheritance you attempted to steal? I think not, Mr. Thompson." Judge Parker gavelled for order. "Mr. Caldwell, what precisely are you proposing?" "2 things, Your Honor. First, that Samuel's biological relationship to the Caldwell family be formally recognized, securing his inheritance rights. Second, that temporary guardianship be granted to Mr. Walker with financial support from the trust to ensure proper living conditions." This proposal sent another shockwave through the courtroom. Mills's attorneys protested immediately, arguing that such arrangements were premature without thorough investigation of Walker's suitability. As the legal arguments escalated, Samuel suddenly slipped from his seat and walked directly to Judge Parker's bench. The room fell silent as the small boy reached into his pocket, withdrawing a folded paper that he presented to the judge with solemn ceremony. Parker accepted it, unfolding what appeared to be a child's drawing. He studied it for a long moment, his expression softening before turning it for others to see. The crude crayon drawing showed 3 figures standing before a small house. The largest figure, clearly meant to be James, stood protectively beside 2 smaller figures holding hands. Above them, floating in the sky, were 2 female figures with wings, angels, unmistakably representing the mothers both children had lost. At the bottom, in careful childish printing, were the words, "Our new family." Samuel, having delivered his message, returned to Mary's side. The courtroom remained hushed, the simple drawing more eloquent than any legal argument. Judge Parker cleared his throat. "I believe I've heard sufficient testimony to render a decision regarding temporary custody." He shuffled his papers, then continued. "Frank Thompson's petition for custody is denied, given substantial evidence of abuse and fraud. County custody is unnecessary given the viable alternatives presented." He looked directly at James. "Mr. Walker, your compassion in taking in these children is commendable. However, your current financial and living situation presents significant concerns." James's heart sank, though he maintained a stoic expression for the children's sake. "Therefore," Parker continued, "I am granting temporary joint guardianship to Rebecca Wilson and James Walker, with the condition that suitable housing be secured within 30 days. He glanced at Caldwell. "The court acknowledges Mr. Caldwell's interest in his grandnephew's welfare and will consider formal recognition of Samuel's inheritance rights in a separate hearing." The judge's gavel fell with finality. "This arrangement will be reviewed in 90 days to determine permanent guardianship. Court is adjourned." The decision, while not a complete victory, was far better than James had dared hope. Mary's fingers found his squeezing tightly in shared relief. Across the aisle, Mills rose abruptly and exited without a word, his attorneys trailing behind. As the courtroom emptied Harrison, Caldwell approached their group. Up close, he appeared older than James had initially thought, perhaps in his 70s, with a dignified bearing despite the slight stoop to his shoulders. "Mr. Walker," he acknowledged, extending his hand. "My brother would be grateful for your protection of his grandson." James accepted the handshake, finding Caldwell's grip surprisingly firm. "I'm just doing what anyone should." "But what few would," Caldwell corrected. "Rebecca has informed me of your circumstances. I'd like to discuss how the trust can assist in creating a proper home for Samuel and Mary too, of course. They shouldn't be separated." As they conversed, Frank Thompson was led past by Sheriff Bennett en route back to his cell. He paused, his gaze fixed on Samuel with an intensity that made James step protectively closer to the children.
"This isn't over," Thompson hissed. "You think you've won, but you haven't. That boy is mine."
"That's enough," Bennett growled, pushing Thompson forward. James watched them go, troubled by the naked hatred in Thompson's eyes. The man had lost everything: his fraudulent claim to Samuel's inheritance, his freedom, his facade of respectability, but his determination remained undiminished. "Take no notice," Caldwell advised. "Thompson will be transferred to St. Louis tomorrow to face charges there. He'll have no further contact with the children." James nodded, though he couldn't shake the sense of foreboding Thompson's threat had instilled. The legal battle might be temporarily won, but he sensed the larger war was far from over. The following days passed in a whirlwind of activity. With Caldwell's financial support, James secured a 3-bedroom house in Oak Ridge, while plans were drawn up for renovating his cabin into a proper home. Rebecca took a leave of absence from the hospital in St. Louis to fulfill her guardianship duties, staying in a room at Martha Sullivan's boarding house. Mary and Samuel settled into town life with the resilience of children who had endured far worse circumstances. Mary began attending the local school, while Samuel, still too young for formal education, spent his days with James at Tom Maxwell's forge, quietly observing the transformation of metal under fire and hammer. A week after the hearing, James returned to his mountain property to collect belongings and assess what would be needed for the renovation. He had expected to feel relief at the temporary reprieve from childcare responsibilities, but instead found himself missing the children's presence. Mary's solemn observations, Samuel's watchful silence, punctuated by rare, precious words. The cabin seemed smaller somehow, emptier without them. James moved through the single room methodically, gathering tools and clothing, pausing occasionally at memories: Sarah's hairbrush still on the shelf, the quilt where the children had first slept by his hearth. He was nearly finished when he heard the approach of a vehicle unusual, given the cabin's remote location. Stepping outside, he was surprised to see Mill's expensive Cadillac navigating the rutted path to his door. The banker emerged alone, surveying the property with the calculating eye of someone assessing a potential acquisition. "Walker," he greeted, his tone almost cordial. "I thought we might have a conversation, man to man." James remained on the porch, making no move to invite Mills inside. "What's left to say? You lost in court." "A temporary setback," Mills dismissed with a wave. "I'm here to offer you a proposition that benefits us both." "Not interested." "You haven't heard the terms." Mills approached, stopping at the foot of the porch steps. "Caldwell's involvement changes things. The trust money complicates matters. But the underlying issue remains the same. I need your land for the dam project." James crossed his arms, waiting silently for Mills to continue. "I'll double my previous offer for your property," Mills stated. "Enough for you to buy a proper ranch elsewhere, Montana, Wyoming, wherever you like. Take the children with you, start fresh. Everyone wins. Except the people whose homes will be flooded when your dam is built," James countered. Mills sighed, a calculated display of reasonableness. "Progress requires sacrifice, Walker. This valley has been dying since the mill closed. The hydroelectric project will bring jobs electricity to remote areas. It's the future. Your future. Your profit. Does it matter whose idea it was, if everyone benefits? Mills spread his hands. Be practical. You're a single man trying to raise two traumatized children. Even with Caldwell's money, it won't be easy. Why not give them a fresh start somewhere else? The offer was tempting in ways James hadn't anticipated. A new beginning far from the shadows of the past, his own and the children's. A proper ranch with good grazing land, no bank breathing down his neck, no reminders of Sarah's death or the children's trauma. Yet something held him back, the same instinct that had prevented him from selling to Mills all these years. This land wasn't just property. It was the physical manifestation of a promise he'd made to Sarah, to himself. To abandon it would be to surrender something essential. The answer is still no, James said finally. This is our home. We're staying. We're here. Mills' expression hardened, the veneer of civility falling away. You're making a mistake. Caldwell won't protect you forever. The old man's health is failing. Everyone knows it. Once he's gone, the trust will be managed by the family attorneys, who are far more pragmatic. Is that a threat? An observation, Mills replied coldly. As is this, Thompson has powerful friends in St. Louis. Friends who might help him escape custody or influence his sentencing. Friends who owe me favors. James descended the porch steps until he stood eye to eye with Mills. Let me make an observation of my own. If anything happens to those children, if Thompson comes within 100 miles of them, I'll hold you personally responsible. Mills held his gaze, neither man willing to back down. Finally, the banker adjusted his hat and turned toward his car. You've made your choice, Walker. I hope you don't live to regret it. As the Cadillac disappeared down the mountain track, James remained standing in the yard, Mills's warning echoing in his mind. The banker never made idle threats. If he was involving Thompson again, despite the legal complications, he must be truly desperate to acquire the land. James's instinct was to return immediately to town to check on the children, but they were safe with Rebecca, and he had work to complete here. The cabin needed to be secured before winter storms made the mountain impassable. He was repairing a loose shutter when he smelled its smoke, not from his chimney, but from somewhere nearby. James climbed onto the roof for a better view, scanning the surrounding forest with growing alarm. A column of smoke rose from the direction of his north pasture, where the spring that fed his property bubbled up from underground. The spring was the reason Mills wanted his land, the water source that would feed the proposed dam. James scrambled down and grabbed his rifle more from habit than any concrete plan. The fire was at least a quarter-mile away, but in the dry autumn conditions it could spread quickly. He set off at a run, following the familiar path through pine forest toward the spring. As he neared the source of the smoke, he slowed, approaching more cautiously. This was no accidental fire. A deliberate blaze had been set around the spring itself, the flames licking at the ancient oak that had sheltered the water source for generations. Movement caught James's eye, a figure retreating through the trees on the far side of the clearing. He raised his rifle instinctively, then lowered it, unwilling to fire at someone he couldn't clearly identify. The immediate priority was controlling the fire before it spread to the surrounding forest. James shed his coat and used it to beat at the flames nearest the tree line, working methodically to contain the blaze. The ground around the spring was damp enough to slow the fire's progress, but the oak itself was already badly damaged, its lower trunk charred and smoking. It took nearly an hour of exhausting work before James was confident the fire wouldn't spread further. By then, the oak that had stood sentinel over the spring for perhaps 200 years was a blackened ruin, its branches bare and scorched against the sky. As he surveyed the damage, James noticed something nailed to what remained of the trunk, a sheet of paper partially singed but still legible. He approached cautiously, half expecting some new threat from Mills. Instead, the paper contained a crude map of his property, with the spring circled in red. Scrawled across the bottom in an unfamiliar hand were the words, "First the water, then the children." James tore the paper down cold fury, replacing exhaustion. This was no random vandalism or attempt to smoke him off his land. This was a direct threat against Mary and Samuel, using his property as a proxy. The question was whether Mills was behind it. The banker was ruthless, but he operated within certain boundaries: legal pressure, financial manipulation, the occasional strong-arm tactic. This felt different, more personal, more reckless. Thompson's words from the courthouse echoed in James's memory. "This isn't over. That boy is mine." Could Thompson have escaped custody or sent someone to deliver this message James needed to get back to town immediately, to warn Rebecca and ensure the children were safe? He was halfway back to the cabin when he heard it, the distinctive crack of a rifle shot, followed by the whine of a bullet passing entirely too close to his head. James dove for cover behind a fallen log, his own rifle clutched tightly as he scanned the surrounding forest. Another shot splintered bark inches from his position. His attacker was no amateur. The shots were precisely placed, designed to pin him down rather than kill outright. A warning, or perhaps an attempt to capture rather than eliminate. James crawled along the log, using it as cover while trying to locate the shooter's position. The angle of the shot suggested high ground, perhaps the ridge to the east, which offered a clear line of sight across this section of the property. He had two options: retreat to the cabin where he'd be a sitting target, or circle around to approach the ridge from behind. The second option was riskier, but offered the possibility of identifying his attacker. Decision made, James slipped into the denser forest to his right, using the trees as cover, while he moved in a wide arc toward the eastern ridge. The third shot came just as he'd expected, hitting the spot where he'd been moments before. The shooter would be repositioning now, realizing his target had moved. James increased his pace, pushing through underbrush and scaling the gentle slope that led to the ridge. His years working this land gave him an advantage. He knew every trail, every rock formation, every potential vantage point. As he neared the top of the ridge, James slowed, moving with the careful silence he'd learned in the war. A twig snapped somewhere ahead, followed by the soft scrape of boots on stone. The shooter was indeed repositioning, likely trying to locate him after losing his clear shot. James circled a large boulder rifle ready and came face to face with his attacker, a lean, hard-faced man he didn't recognize, dressed in city clothes, ill-suited for the forest. The man's rifle was half-raised, his expression changing from concentration to surprise as he registered James's presence. For a heartbeat, they both froze, locked in mutual assessment. Then the stranger smiled, a cold expression devoid of humor. "Walker," he acknowledged, making no move to fully raise his weapon. "Thompson said you were resourceful." The confirmation sent a chill through James. "Thompson sent you?" "Not directly." The man shrugged. "Let's say we have a mutual acquaintance who arranged my services. I'm just delivering a message." "With bullets." "Got your attention, didn't it?" The stranger's casual tone belied the deadly seriousness of the situation. "The message is simple. Give up the boy, or next time I won't miss. Neither will my colleagues in town." James's blood ran cold. "What colleagues?" "The ones watching those kids right now." The man checked his pocket watch with deliberate nonchalance. "Should be making their move any time now, while you're conveniently up here dealing with me." Realization struck like a physical blow. The fire, the shots, they weren't the threat. They were the distraction. The real target was in town with Rebecca. "If you've hurt those children," James began, raising his rifle. "Relax," the man interrupted. "No one's planning to hurt them. Thompson just wants what's his. The boy goes with us, the girl stays with you. Everyone lives happily ever after." His smile widened. "Well, except you when that dam gets built." James had heard enough. In one fluid motion, he swung his rifle not to shoot, but to strike. The wooden stock connected solidly with the stranger's temple, dropping him unconscious to the forest floor. Working quickly, James bound the man's hands and feet with his own belt and bootlaces, then dragged him to a sheltered spot where he wouldn't immediately freeze or be found by predators. Justice would have to wait. The children's safety came first. He ran back to the cabin, lungs burning and legs protesting the punishing pace. His truck, an aging Ford he'd maintained through sheer determination and mechanical ingenuity, sat behind the cabin. It hadn't been started in weeks, fuel being too precious to waste on trips he could make on foot. James turned the key, uttering a desperate prayer, as the engine coughed reluctantly to life. The road down the mountain was treacherous in the best conditions. In his current state of mind, with dusk approaching, it was potentially suicidal. But the alternative, arriving too late, was unthinkable. He pushed the truck to its limits, navigating hairpin turns with reckless speed, the image of Mary and Samuel's faces fixed in his mind. They had already endured too much loss, too much betrayal. He wouldn't fail them now. As Oak Ridge came into view in the valley below, James spotted an unfamiliar black sedan parked outside Martha Sullivan's boarding house where Rebecca and the children were staying. His worst fears crystallized into certainty. He was too late. James abandoned the truck at the edge of town, its engine sputtering and steaming in protest of the punishing drive. He ran the remaining distance to Martha Sullivan's boarding house, his rifle slung across his back. Several townspeople called out to him as he passed, but their words barely registered through the fog of his fear. The black sedan stood empty, its sleek lines and city license plate confirming it didn't belong to any Oak Ridge resident. James slowed as he approached the boarding house, forcing himself to think tactically rather than charging in blindly. Two strange men in a small town like Oak Ridge would be noticed immediately. If they were planning to take Samuel, they would need to be quick and quiet. He circled to the back of the building where Martha's kitchen garden offered a view of the rear entrance. The door stood slightly ajar, unusual for the fastidious widow who ran the establishment. James approached cautiously, rifle now in hand, and slipped inside. The kitchen was empty, but showed signs of recent disturbance. A chair overturned, a teacup shattered on the floor, water still pooling around the fragments. He moved silently through to the main hall, straining to hear any sound that might indicate where the children were. A muffled thump came from upstairs, followed by a man's hushed curse. James took the stairs, two at a time, all pretense of caution abandoned. As he reached the upper landing, he saw the door to Rebecca's room standing open, a large man blocking the entrance. The stranger turned at James's approach, revealing a bruised jaw and a furious expression. Inside the room, a second man was struggling with Rebecca, who had positioned herself in front of a closet door, arms spread defensively. "Where are the children?" James demanded, raising his rifle. The man at the door reached inside his coat, but James was faster. He swung the rifle butt in a vicious arc that caught the stranger squarely in the temple, dropping him unconscious to the floor. James stepped over him, into the room, training the weapon on the second intruder. "Let her go," he ordered, voice deadly calm. "Now." The man released Rebecca, raising his hands slowly. "Easy there, friend. This is just a misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding is yours thinking you could take those children." James jerked his head toward the door. Get out. Tell Thompson and Mills their plan failed. Rebecca moved to James's side, a darkening bruise visible on her cheekbone. They're not here for Thompson, she said quietly. They showed me identification. They're private investigators hired by the Caldwell family attorneys. James's grip on the rifle faltered. What? Perhaps, if you'd asked questions before attacking my colleague, the man said stiffly, this situation could have been resolved more civilly. From the closet behind Rebecca came a small voice. James, is that you, Mary? The sound of her voice, frightened but alive, sent a wave of relief crashing through him. It's me, Mary. Are you and Samuel all right? Yes, she called back. Rebecca told us to hide when the men came. James lowered his rifle slightly, though he kept it ready. Explain, he demanded of the investigator. Now. The man straightened his rumpled suit. Harrison Caldwell died last night. Heart failure. The family attorneys dispatched us to secure Samuel's safety, given the previous attempts on his person. Why didn't you go through proper channels? The sheriff, the court. Time was of the essence. Mr. Caldwell's death will become public knowledge by morning. We feared Thompson's associates might move quickly once they learned the primary obstacle to their plans was gone. Rebecca stepped forward. I tried to tell them we had the situation under control, but they insisted on taking Samuel to see Lewis immediately without you or me. The pieces aligned in James's mind. Mills had known about Caldwell's declining health, had practically predicted the old man's death. The banker's warning now made terrible sense. Caldwell won't protect you forever. So the attack at my property, the fire that wasn't Thompson's men, the investigator frowned. What attack? We've been in town since this morning, making arrangements at the hotel for transport to St. Louis. James's mind raced. If these men hadn't been sent by Thompson, then who had attacked him on the mountain Mills himself? Some third party he hadn't considered. The unconscious man in the hallway groaned, beginning to stir. His colleague moved to assist him, but James blocked his path. Not yet. First, prove who you are. The investigator produced identification documents that appeared legitimate Pinkerton agency credentials, a letter from the Caldwell family attorneys, and detailed knowledge of Samuel's case that only someone involved would possess. James relaxed marginally. Even if I believe you, Samuel isn't going anywhere without proper authorization. Judge Parker granted Rebecca and me joint guardianship. Temporary guardianship, the man corrected. Given Mr. Caldwell's death, the circumstances have changed materially. The trust stipulates that in the absence of the named trustee, Samuel's care reverts to the family's designated representatives until a suitable permanent arrangement can be established. Rebecca stepped closer to James, lowering her voice. I think they're telling the truth about who they are. But I don't trust their intentions. The timing is too convenient, especially with what happened at your property. James nodded slightly, mind working through possibilities. If these men were legitimate, refusing them outright could create legal complications. If they weren't, or if their motives weren't as straightforward as claimed releasing Samuel to them, could be catastrophic. We'll need to consult Judge Parker, he decided aloud, and Sheriff Bennett should be informed of the situation, including the attack on my property. The investigator looked as though he might object, but the sound of approaching footsteps on the stairs interrupted whatever he might have said. Tom Maxwell appeared in the doorway, a heavy wrench gripped in one massive hand. Behind him stood Dr. Anderson and, surprisingly, Martha Sullivan herself, armed with a cast-iron skillet. Heard there was trouble, Tom stated simply, eyeing the semi-conscious man on the floor and the tense standoff within the room. Thought you might need assistance. James had never been more grateful for small-town vigilance. News traveled fast in Oak Ridge. Martha must have alerted others when the strangers arrived. These men claimed to be Pinkerton agents sent by the Caldwell family, James explained. They want to take Samuel to St. Louis immediately. Is that so? Tom's grip on the wrench tightened. Seems to me the boy's legal guardians might have something to say about that. Martha stepped forward, her thin frame somehow imposing despite her age. This is my establishment, and I didn't authorize anyone to manhandle my guests. I think perhaps the sheriff should sort this out. The investigator glanced between the determined faces surrounding him and apparently reconsidered his options. Very well. We'll involve the local authorities, but I warn you, any delay in securing the boy's safety could have serious consequences. Samuel is perfectly safe with us, Rebecca stated firmly. We've already proven that by stopping Thompson. While Dr. Anderson tended to Rebecca's bruised face and the still groggy investigator on the floor, James opened the closet door. Mary immediately launched herself into his arms, while Samuel remained huddled in the corner, wide-eyed and trembling. It's all right now, James assured them, gathering Samuel into his embrace as well. No one's taking either of you anywhere. Mary clung to him fiercely. We heard fighting. Rebecca told us to stay hidden no matter what. She gave good instructions, James said, meeting Rebecca's eyes over the children's heads. You're both safe now. As the impromptu group made its way to the sheriff's office, James remained hyper-aware of their surroundings, half expecting another attack. The events at his property suggested there were multiple threats to consider, not just the Pinkerton agents with their questionable timing. Sheriff Bennett listened to all parties with surprising patience, examining the investigators' credentials thoroughly before confirming their legitimacy via telegram to their St. Louis office. They appear to be who they claim, he informed James and Rebecca privately. But that doesn't mean their instructions supersede a court order. Judge Parker will have to rule on this. And the attack at my property, James pressed. Someone deliberately set fire to the spring oak and took shots at me with a rifle. I subdued the attacker and left him restrained near the eastern ridge. Bennett frowned. I'll send deputies up there immediately. Did you recognize the man? No, but he mentioned Thompson and implied Mills was involved. James hesitated, then added, he also said it was a distraction from the real target in town. Rebecca paled. The children. They coordinated attacks to separate us. Bennett's frown deepened. That suggests organization beyond what Thompson could manage from a jail cell. Mills has influence, certainly, but outright violence, it would be a significant escalation. Check Thompson's cell, James suggested. Make sure he's still there. The sheriff dispatched a deputy to the county jail, while another team headed to James's property to search for the restrained attacker. Judge Parker was summoned to rule on the Pinkerton agent's authority, arriving with visible irritation at the late-night proceedings. While the adults sorted through the legal complexities, Mary and Samuel waited in Bennett's office, exhaustion evident in their slumped shoulders and heavy eyelids. James brought them blankets and the peppermint candies he'd carried in his pocket since that first shopping trip after securing employment. Will they take Samuel away? Mary asked quietly, the candy untouched in her palm. James considered lying to protect her from worry, then thought better of it. She had survived this long by being aware of dangers, not by being sheltered from them. Some people think Samuel would be safer in St. Louis with his grandfather's family, he explained gently. We're trying to convince them he's safer here with us. We belong together, Mary insisted, small fingers intertwining with her brother's. Mama said so. I know. James brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. And I promise I'll do everything I can to keep you together. Samuel, who had remained characteristically silent throughout the ordeal, suddenly spoke. "Stay with James," he said clearly, looking up with solemn eyes. "Home." The simple declaration struck James with unexpected force. Home. Such a commonplace word, yet laden with meaning. His cabin had been shelter, a place to exist, but it hadn't truly been home since Sarah died. Somehow, against all odds, these children had transformed it back into something vital and meaningful. Before he could respond, the deputy who'd been sent to check on Thompson burst into the station, breathless with urgency. "Sheriff Thompson's gone." Bennett was on his feet instantly. "What do you mean, gone?" "Broke out sometime this evening. Overpowered the night guard. Stole his gun and uniform." The deputy's words tumbled out in a rush. "County's organizing a manhunt, but he's got at least a 3-hour head start." James felt cold certainty settle in his gut. Thompson's escape, the attack at his property, the Pinkerton agent's arrival all on the same day Caldwell died. It couldn't be coincidence. "He's coming for Samuel," he stated flatly. "The inheritance is his last chance at the life he thinks he deserves." Judge Parker, who had been conferring with the Pinkerton agents, and Rebecca approached with a grave expression. "In light of these developments, I'm inclined to believe the boy might indeed be safer in St. Louis with the resources of the Caldwell family to protect him." "Separating the children would be a mistake," Rebecca argued. "Mary and Samuel need each other, especially now." "Mary could accompany him," the judge suggested, though his tone indicated he recognized the inadequacy of this solution. "As his sister, she has some claim to Caldwell protection as well." James shook his head firmly. "Breaking up their family isn't the answer. Neither is sending them hundreds of miles away with strangers, no matter how official their credentials." "What do you propose, then?" Parker asked. "Thompson is desperate and armed. Mills likely has a hand in this somewhere. Your remote cabin is hardly defensible." "We don't go to the cabin," James decided. "At least not directly. Thompson will expect us to either stay in town or head up the mountain. We need a third option." Tom Maxwell, who had remained a silent presence throughout the proceedings, spoke up. "My brother's hunting lodge. 30 miles east, accessible only by logging roads. Thompson wouldn't know about it, and it's not on any maps Mills might have." James considered the suggestion. The lodge was remote, but defensible with clear sight lines and limited approaches. It would buy them time while the authorities tracked Thompson. "How soon can we leave?" he asked. "My truck's out back," Tom replied. "Can be ready in 15 minutes. Judge Parker looked as though he might object, then sighed heavily. "I don't have the authority to stop you given that you and Miss Wilson remain the children's legal guardians, but I strongly advise against taking matters into your own hands. Thompson is dangerous." "So am I," James replied quietly, "when it comes to protecting those children." The next hour passed in a flurry of preparations. Tom's truck was loaded with supplies, food blankets, ammunition for James's rifle, medical supplies from Dr. Anderson. The Pinkerton agents, after heated debate, agreed to remain in town to coordinate with Sheriff Bennett's office, recognizing that their unfamiliarity with the terrain made them more liability than asset in the wilderness. As dawn approached, James, Rebecca, and the children set out with Tom driving, taking a circuitous route through back roads to avoid potential observation. The children dozed in the cramped back seat, exhausted by the night's events, while the adults maintained vigilant silence, scanning the passing landscape for threats. The hunting lodge emerged from the forest like something from another time. A solid structure of logs and stone, built by Tom's grandfather in more prosperous days. It stood in a small clearing backed against a sheer cliff that protected its rear approach. A stream provided water, and the surrounding forest offered both concealment and resources for someone who knew how to use them. "It's not much," Tom acknowledged as they unloaded supplies. "But it's defensible. Single approach, good visibility. Stocked wood pile for the stove. Should be comfortable enough until this blows over." James clasped the blacksmith's shoulder gratefully. "Thank you, Tom. I won't forget this." "No need for thanks. Some things a man does because they need doing." Tom glanced at the sleeping children now carried inside and settled on a rough bunk. "Those little ones deserve better than what life's handed them so far. See that they get it." With that simple charge, Tom departed his truck, rumbling back down the logging road toward Oak Ridge, where he would report their safe arrival to Bennett and continue coordinating the search for Thompson. Inside the lodge, Rebecca had already started a fire in the cast-iron stove, the warmth gradually dispelling the building's deep chill. James secured doors and windows, mentally cataloging defensive positions and potential vulnerabilities. "Do you think he'll find us?" Rebecca asked quietly, arranging blankets around the still sleeping children. "Thompson, eventually, perhaps. He's motivated and desperate." James checked the rifle's action, ensuring it was clean and ready. "But we have advantages, knowledge of the terrain, preparation, warning." Rebecca studied him with thoughtful eyes. "You've changed since I first met you in that courtroom. There's purpose in you now." James considered this. "I suppose there is. These past weeks have forced me to look beyond my own grief, to see possibilities instead of just enduring. The children have been good for you, and I hope I've been good for them." He glanced at Mary and Samuel, their small faces peaceful in sleep, despite the danger surrounding them. "They deserve a real home, Rebecca. Security, stability, love. I'm not sure I know how to provide all that, but I want to try." "You've already begun," she assured him. "Home isn't just walls and a roof. It's where you're safe, where you belong. Those children feel that with you." The day passed quietly, the lodge's isolation creating an illusion of safety that James was careful not to trust completely. He maintained regular perimeter checks, while Rebecca organized their supplies and entertained the children with stories and simple games fashioned from pine cones and twigs. Samuel, whose vocabulary had expanded dramatically since the courtroom revelation, followed James during his security rounds, observing with solemn attention as the man explained basic tracking and vigilance techniques. "Looking for broken branches," the boy repeated carefully after James's explanation. "Footprints in soft ground." "That's right," James confirmed, surprised and pleased by the child's retention. "Signs that someone has passed this way who doesn't belong." Samuel nodded seriously. "Like father, he doesn't belong here." The simple truth of the statement struck James forcefully. "No, he doesn't, and he won't hurt you again. I promise." The boy considered this, his young face thoughtful beyond his years. "You'll stop him like before." "Yes," James said firmly. "I'll stop him." Samuel seemed satisfied with this assurance, slipping his small hand into James's as they continued their patrol. The gesture of trust affected James deeply, reinforcing his determination to protect this child who had endured so much, yet still found the courage to reach out. That evening, after a simple meal of canned beans and dried beef, reconstituted in broth, the four gathered around the stove's warmth. Outside, an early winter storm had begun, wind howling through the surrounding pines and rattling the lodge's sturdy shutters. Mary, who had been uncharacteristically quiet throughout the day, finally voiced the question that had clearly been troubling her. What happens after, when the bad men are gone? James and Rebecca exchanged glances, neither having a simple answer. The legal complexities of their situation remained unresolved. The Caldwell family's interest in Samuel, the joint guardianship arrangement, the question of where they would ultimately live. "We'll figure that out together," James promised. "But whatever happens, you and Samuel will stay together, and Rebecca and I will make sure you're safe and cared for." "But where will home be?" Mary pressed the practical concerns of a child who had already lost too many foundations. James considered how to answer. The cabin on the mountain held meaning for him, Sarah's memory, the land they had loved together, but it was isolated, primitive, possibly unsafe, given Mills's continued interest. The house in town was temporary, dependent on Caldwell money that might now be contested. "Home will be where we make it," he said finally. "Whether that's the cabin or town or somewhere new altogether." Mary absorbed this, then nodded with the gravity that so defined her. "Mama said home is people, not places." "Your mama was very wise," Rebecca said gently. Samuel, who had been listening silently, suddenly straightened. "Someone's coming," he whispered, pointing toward the window. James was on his feet, instantly, rifle in hand. "How do you know?" "Heard engine," the boy replied simply. "Far away, but coming closer." James exchanged a glance with Rebecca, who immediately began gathering the children's things. "Get them to the root cellar," he instructed. "There's an escape tunnel that leads to the stream bed. Tom showed me earlier." Rebecca nodded, ushering the children toward the trap door James indicated. Mary went willingly, but Samuel hesitated, looking back at James with troubled eyes. "You'll come too?" he asked. "As soon as I make sure who it is," James promised. "Go with Rebecca now. Stay quiet." Once they were safely below, James extinguished the lamps, leaving only the stove's glow for illumination. He positioned himself at a window that offered a view of the approaching road rifle, ready but not visible to anyone outside. The sound of an engine grew steadily louder, then cut abruptly some distance away, a tactical decision to approach more stealthily. James strained to see through the swirling snow, catching glimpses of movement among the trees. Not one person, but two. They separated, approaching the lodge from different angles. Military training, or at least experienced hunters. James recognized the classic flanking maneuver and adjusted his position accordingly. The first figure emerged from the tree line, a man in a sheriff's uniform. For a moment, James felt hope surge that Bennett had sent deputies to update them. Then he recognized the stride, the posture, the confident swagger that belonged to only one man, Frank Thompson. He was wearing what must be the stolen deputy's uniform, using it as both disguise and protection against the elements. The second figure remained at the forest edge, providing cover only occasionally visible as a darker shadow against the snow. James weighed his options. He could confront them directly using the lodge's sturdy walls as protection. Or he could retreat to the root cellar using the escape tunnel to evacuate everyone. The second option was safer for the children, but would leave them exposed in a snowstorm with no clear destination. Before he could decide, Thompson approached the front door, knocking with the confident rhythm of authority. "Sheriff's Department, open up." James remained silent, watching through a crack in the shutters as Thompson waited, then knocked again more forcefully. "Walker, I know you're in there with the children. Make this easy on yourself." The second figure emerged partially from the trees. Another man in civilian clothes, rifle raised and trained on the lodge. Thompson's backup, ready to prevent escape or provide firepower if needed. James shifted position, keeping to the shadows as he moved to a better vantage point. Thompson was growing impatient, circling the building and testing windows, looking for a way in. The lodge was well built, however, its defenses designed to withstand both weather and unwelcome visitors. "Last chance, Walker." Thompson called his false civility giving way to frustration. "Send Samuel out, and the rest of you can walk away. All I want is what's rightfully mine." James remained silent, tracking Thompson's movements through the various windows. The second man had approached closer now, covering the building's rear exit. They were methodical professional, not the actions of a desperate escaped prisoner, but of someone with a clear plan and resources. A soft creak from the trap door drew James's attention. Rebecca emerged partway, her face questioning in the dim light. He gestured for her to stay hidden, but she shook her head insistently. "Mary has an idea," she whispered. "You should hear it." James hesitated, reluctant to leave his surveillance, but curious about what the girl might have conceived. He moved silently to the trap door, keeping low to avoid any sight lines from the windows. Mary's face appeared in the opening, her expression unnervingly calm for a child in such circumstances. "Father is afraid of fire," she whispered. "From when he was little. Mama told me once." James processed this unexpected information. "How does that help us? The woodpile outside," Mary continued. "If it burned, he'd stay away from that side. We could escape through the tunnel while he's distracted." The simplicity and effectiveness of the strategy impressed James. The woodpile was stacked against the eastern wall away from the escape tunnel's exit, but visible from most approaches. A fire there would create both distraction and psychological deterrent. "Smart thinking," he told Mary, whose solemn face brightened slightly at the praise. "We'll need something to start it with in this snow." Rebecca produced a small kerosene lamp from the supplies they'd brought. "Would this work?" James nodded. "Perfect. I'll circle around through the tunnel, approach the woodpile from behind. When you hear 3 owl calls, open the shutters on the east side briefly, just enough to draw their attention. Then get back to the tunnel and be ready to move." The plan set. James descended into the root cellar rifle slung across his back. The escape tunnel was narrow, but navigable, clearly designed for emergency egress. Samuel watched with wide eyes as James prepared to enter it. "Be careful," the boy said softly, the simple phrase carrying the weight of someone who had seen too many people fail to return. "I will," James promised. "And when this is over, we're going home, all of us together." The tunnel emerged as Tom had described, near the stream bed, sheltered by overhanging rock and concealed by brush. James moved cautiously through the swirling snow, circling wide to approach the woodpile from the blind side of the lodge. He could hear Thompson and his companion conversing in low voices, discussing their next move. The snowstorm had clearly disrupted their original plan, adding urgency to their mission. "We should just burn them out," the second man suggested. "Smoke 'em into the open." "Too risky," Thompson replied. "The boy could be harmed. He's worth nothing to us dead." "The others, then?" Thompson's laugh was cold. "Do what you want with Walker and the woman. The girl, too, for all I care. Just make sure Samuel comes out unharmed." The casual cruelty, the disregard for Mary, his legal daughter, cemented James's resolve. This man would never touch either child again, regardless of blood ties or legal documents. James reached the woodpile undetected, sheltered from view by the lodge's bulk. He uncapped the kerosene lamp, dousing the driest portions of the wood, then retreated to a safe distance. The owl call signal, 3 distinct hoots cut through the wind's howl. Seconds later, shutters on the east side cracked open briefly, drawing the attention of both men. James struck a match, shielding it from the snow with his body, then touched it to the kerosene-soaked wood. Despite the weather, the fire caught quickly, hungry flames leaping upward as the accelerant did its work. James circled back toward the tunnel entrance, keeping to the shadows as Thompson and his companion reacted to the sudden blaze. "Fire!" the second man shouted, pointing unnecessarily at the rapidly expanding conflagration. Thompson's reaction was immediate and visceral, a sharp backward step, face contorting with instinctive fear. "Watch the exits," he ordered, voice pitched higher than before. "They'll try to run." As predicted, both men focused on the lodge's doors, expecting the occupants to flee the apparent danger. Neither noticed James's approach to the stream bed, where Rebecca was already emerging with the children bundled against the cold and moving as quickly as the snow allowed. They had nearly reached the tree line when disaster struck. Samuel slipped on an icy rock, crying out involuntarily as he fell. The sound carried in the winter air, jerking Thompson's attention away from the burning woodpile. "There!" he shouted, pointing toward the stream. "They're escaping!" His companion swung his rifle toward the fleeing group, taking aim at Rebecca as she helped Samuel to his feet. James reacted without conscious thought, raising his own weapon and firing in one fluid motion. The shot struck the rifleman's shoulder, spinning him backward into the snow. Thompson, now aware of James's position, drew his stolen deputy's revolver. "Walker," he snarled, all pretense of civility abandoned. "You've interfered for the last time." James ducked behind a boulder as Thompson fired the bullet, chipping stone inches from his head. He glanced toward Rebecca and the children, relieved to see they had reached the protective cover of the forest. Now he needed to occupy Thompson long enough for them to put distance between themselves and danger. "It's over, Thompson," he called. "Bennett knows you've escaped. Every lawman in 3 counties is looking for you. It's not over until I have what's mine." Thompson advanced, using trees for cover as he worked his way closer to James's position. "That fortune belongs to me. I earned it living with that woman, pretending her bastard was my son." James held his fire, conserving ammunition and waiting for a clearer shot. "Samuel was never yours. Grace knew it. Mary knows it. Even you know it. You're fighting for a lie. A very valuable lie," Thompson countered, edging closer. "One that would have worked if you hadn't interfered. Mills promised me it would be simple pressure you off your land, collect the boy, access the inheritance. Everyone wins. Except 2 innocent children who lose everything," James replied, shifting position as Thompson's footsteps crunched in the snow to his right. "Except Grace, who died protecting them from you." Thompson's laugh was harsh in the winter air. "Grace was weak, always worried about doing the right thing. Look where that got her, dead in a tenant farmer's shack, while I'm about to become a very wealthy man." The casual dismissal of Grace's sacrifice ignited a cold fury in James. This man had abused Samuel, terrorized. Mary pursued them relentlessly, all for money he had no right to claim. He represented everything James despised: greed, cruelty, the exploitation of the vulnerable. As Thompson moved into a small clearing momentarily exposed, James saw his opportunity. He aimed carefully, squeezing the trigger with practiced precision. The rifle cracked the shot, echoing across the snowy landscape. Thompson staggered, clutching his leg where the bullet had struck. He fell to one knee, revolver still gripped in his right hand. "You think this changes anything?" he gasped, pain and rage contorting his features. "Mills has judges in his pocket. Lawyers. You're nothing, a washed-up rancher playing at being a hero." James emerged from cover, rifle trained steadily on Thompson's chest. "Drop the gun." For a moment, it seemed Thompson might comply. Then his expression hardened, hatred overcoming reason. He raised the revolver, aiming directly at James. The rifle's report was definitive in the winter stillness. Thompson collapsed backward into the snow, the revolver falling from lifeless fingers. James approached cautiously, checking for signs of life, though he knew he would find none. The shot had been true, striking Thompson's heart with the same precision James had once employed in the trenches of France. He felt no satisfaction, no triumph, only a weary relief that the threat was ended. He collected Thompson's revolver and checked on the wounded accomplice who had lost consciousness from blood loss, but still breathed. Using the man's own belt, James fashioned a tourniquet to prevent him from bleeding out before help could arrive. Then he followed the tracks Rebecca and the children had left, catching up to them at the rendezvous point Tom had designated a hunter's blind, half a mile from the lodge stocked with emergency supplies. Rebecca's face told him she already knew what had happened. "Thompson?" she asked quietly, keeping the children occupied with warming themselves by the blind's small stove. "Dead," James confirmed simply. "His companion is wounded but alive. He'll face justice for his part in this." Rebecca nodded, accepting the necessity of what had occurred. "What now?" "We wait for Tom. He should return by nightfall to check on us." James brushed snow from his coat. "Then we go home." Mary approached, having overheard the exchange. "Is it over?" she asked, her young voice carrying the weight of someone who had learned to be wary of false security. "Really over?" James knelt to her level. "Thompson can't hurt you or Samuel ever again. That part is over." "And Mills?" "Mills will face his own reckoning," James assured her. "Judge Parker was already investigating his connections to Thompson. With what we've learned today, his power in Oak Ridge is broken." Mary considered this, then nodded with her characteristic solemnity. "Good. Then we can be a family now." The simple declaration, offered without qualification or doubt, touched something deep in James's heart. Family. A word he had stopped allowing himself to consider after Sarah's death. A future he had believed was closed to him forever. "Yes," he agreed softly. "We can be a family now." Samuel joined them, pressing against James's side with uncharacteristic demonstrativeness. "Home," he asked, the single word carrying layers of meaning beyond its simplicity. James gathered both children into his arms, feeling the weight of promise and possibility. "Home," he confirmed. "Together." Spring came early to the mountains that year, snow melting to reveal tender green shoots pushing through the dark earth. The cabin on James's property had been expanded over the winter months. 2 additional rooms added a proper roof, installed windows that caught the morning light. Mills had indeed faced his reckoning. The investigation following Thompson's death had uncovered evidence of extensive corruption, illegal land acquisitions, and conspiracy that extended far beyond Oak Ridge. The banker now awaited trial in the state prison, his dam project abandoned, his empire crumbling. The Caldwell family, after initial resistance, had recognized the wisdom of allowing Samuel to remain with those who had protected him so fiercely. A trust was established to provide for his education and future, with James and Rebecca named as co-trustees. Mary, though not a blood relation to the Caldwells, was included in the provisions, an acknowledgement of the siblings' unbreakable bond. Rebecca had returned to St. Louis briefly to settle her affairs, then accepted a position as Oak Ridge's public health nurse. She visited the mountain cabin regularly, her friendship with James evolving gradually into something deeper, though neither rushed to define it. On this particular morning, James stood on the porch watching Mary and Samuel in the newly fenced garden. They were planting vegetable seeds in neat rows, Mary patiently demonstrating the proper depth to her brother, who absorbed the lesson with characteristic intensity. Both children had changed in the months since Thompson's death. Mary smiled more readily, her solemn demeanor softening as security replaced constant vigilance. Samuel spoke in full sentences now, his vocabulary expanding daily, though he remained thoughtful and selective with his words. James himself had changed perhaps the most. Grief, which had once defined his existence, had receded to a gentler memory. Sarah would always be part of him, but her absence no longer constituted the whole of his identity. He had purpose, now responsibility, a future to build, rather than merely a past to mourn. The sound of a vehicle approaching drew his attention. Rebecca's car appeared around the bend, dust rising behind it on the improved road that now connected the property to town. She parked beside the new barn and emerged with a basket likely filled with the mail and supplies she routinely brought from Oak Ridge. "James," Mary called excitedly, noticing the arrival, "Rebecca's here. Can we show her the seeds we planted?" "Of course," he replied, smiling at her enthusiasm. "Just wipe the dirt from your hands first." As Rebecca approached, Samuel abandoned his gardening to meet her, his small face alight with uncharacteristic animation. "We're growing food," he announced proudly. "I dug the holes myself." "Wonderful," Rebecca exclaimed, setting down her basket to examine his work. "You'll be a farmer like James in no time." The casual comparison sent a warm current through James's chest, like James. The boy was finding models beyond survival and fear, learning that men could build rather than destroy, nurture rather than harm. Later, after the children had shown Rebecca every seed and sprout in the garden, the four sat together on the porch for lunch. Simple fare, fresh bread from Martha Sullivan's boarding house, cheese from the new dairy in Oak Ridge, early lettuce from their own garden. I received a letter from Harrison Caldwell's daughter. Rebecca mentioned removing an envelope from her pocket. She'd like to visit Samuel this summer, get to know him. James nodded thoughtfully. "That would be good for him. Family connections should be preserved when they're healthy." She mentions bringing her children Samuel's cousins. They're eager to meet him. Mary looked up sharply. "Samuel won't have to go away, will he?" "No," Rebecca assured her quickly. "They want to visit here to see where he lives. They're simply extending family, not replacing it." The girl relaxed, returning to her bread with renewed appetite. "Good, because we're staying together, all of us." James met Rebecca's gaze over the children's heads, a silent communication passing between them. They had discussed the future tentatively, the possibility of formalizing their partnership, of creating a more traditional family structure for the children. Neither rushed the conversation, respectful of the bonds already formed and the trauma still healing. As the meal concluded, Samuel surprised them all by speaking up unprompted. "I remember now," he said, his young voice serious. "Remember what, Samuel?" Rebecca asked gently. "The bread." He looked at James directly. "The first night. You broke it in 3 pieces. Gave me the biggest." His small face was solemn with the weight of memory. "No one ever did that before." James felt his throat tighten at the simple observation. Such a small gesture, dividing what little he had, giving the largest portion to the hungriest child. He hadn't thought of it as significant at the time, merely necessary. Yet it had imprinted on Samuel's memory as evidence of safety, of worth. "Sometimes," James said carefully, finding words for what he had only felt, "a piece of bread is more than food. It's a promise that you matter, that you belong." Mary nodded sagely. "Mama said you can tell a good person by whether they share when they don't have much themselves." "Your mama was very wise," Rebecca said, her hand finding James's on the rough wooden table. As the afternoon sun slanted across the porch, casting long shadows across the valley below, James surveyed the life that had assembled itself around him. Children who had once been strangers, now the center of his world. Land that had been merely property, now truly home. A future that had once seemed barren, now rich with possibility. The journey had been unlikely painful at times, marked by violence and loss. Yet here they were, a family cobbled together by circumstance, but bound now by something stronger than blood or law. A family built on the foundation of one simple act of decency, sharing the last piece of bread with a hungry child. Samuel leaned against James's side, content in a way that would have been unimaginable months ago. "We're home," he said, simply, not a question this time, but a statement of certainty. "Yes," James agreed, his arm encircling the boy's thin shoulders. "We're home." The end.